In this video, I'd like to show you the text tool. Now, the text tool is largely self-explanatory, but there are a few features that are worth noting. And so let's just go ahead and run through the tool. But overall, you're going to find it is pretty straightforward. So there's a couple places you can get to it. It is up here on the quick access toolbar. You can get there from the annotate tab right here, or you can just use the keyboard shortcut of TX. Now, when you run the text tool, there are some options available on the ribbon. And you'll notice right here that we can either create text without a leader, or we could create it with a 1 or 2 segment leader or a curved leader. Now I'm going to show you some of the leader options a little bit later, but for now I'm just going to create a piece of text and I'll just sort of click somewhere on the screen and start typing in the note that I want to place. Now, this is the first thing I want you to get used to when working with text in Revit. There's a tendency to want to press enter here in order to complete the note. You'll see that that just simply puts you to the next line and keeps you within the note. Sometimes folks want to press enter there, but when you do that, it's going to say, are you sure? Do you want to keep your changes? Now, you can answer yes and continue, or you could answer no and throw the note away. So I'll answer yes. But the right way to get out of a note, or the easiest way to get out of a note, is to actually click next to it. So if I just click an empty white space next to the note, that will complete the typing and it won't display any messages. And so it's not wrong to do it the other way. It's just a little bit more efficient to get in the habit of clicking next to it. So I wanted to point that out to you. Okay, so now I'm going to just zoom in on this note here that I just created. And I want to point out to you those two little icons at the top. This one right here on the left is a drag cursor, and you can use that to move the note around. So that can be the easiest way to relocate a note. If you get nearby another piece of text, then it will sense where that text is and they will try to line up with one another. So be on the lookout for that. Now, the second little icon here allows you to rotate the note. So if you need it to be at some angle other than horizontal, you can do that. If you rotate past 90 degrees, by default, it will flip it so that it remains readable. That is controlled by this little checkbox over here on the properties palette. If you uncheck this, it will allow you to have an upside down note. So in the case where you need the note to be upside down, just remember to uncheck keep readable. Otherwise, if that is turned on, then it will automatically reorient it for you. Now I'm going to delete this note and let's come back and reconsider this one. So let's say that I have this one right here. And what I want to do is I want to start pointing that to something in the model. Okay. So with the note selected, you will see those leader options that we were talking about a little while ago. We can place leaders on the left or the right side, and we can use straight lines or curved lines to create those leaders. So I'll let you choose whichever one you want, but I'm going to do a left-oriented straight leader, and it will give me these two little grip controls. So what you do is you simply drag these to point at the item that you want to call out, and then optionally, you can adjust this second grip here to create a little shoulder for the note. And it's really just that simple to create a note with a leader line. Now, if you wish, you can create the text note and the leader line in a single step. So I'm going to deselect that, go back to my text tool, and I will go to this 2-segment leader option right here. And this will allow me to first click where I want the arrow to point to. So I'm going to point to this brick soldier course here. The next click will be where you want that shoulder point to be. Notice that it is able to line up with the existing one. So I'm going to click there. And then the final point is going to line up with the existing leader. And then you simply type in your note. Now, again, don't press enter, just click away from it to complete the typing. So once I've done that, I can click the modify tool to finish out of the command. I can come back and select it, and you're still able to add leaders on either side, both the right and the left. So notice that a single note can have multiple leaders. Now we can also remove leaders using this button here, but sadly this removes the last leader. So that means if I wanted to remove the leader on the right, I have to first remove the second one on the left, then the one on the right, and then I have to come back and re-add the one on the left. So it's a minor inconvenience, but something you should be aware of. So I can take this grip now and I can point that down to something else. And so it's easy to have a single note point to multiple elements. Now let me create another one, but here right on top of the brick wall. So I'm going to deselect everything, go back to text. This time I'm going to just do, well, let's stick with the leader actually. I'm going to go ahead and point the leader right here and then maybe here and like so. Type in my note, click away from it, cancel with the modify. I want to come back and select. Notice it's a little tricky. You might need to use your tab key. And it might take a few tries of tabbing to get there, but I'm going to select the note, add another leader line on the right, point to somewhere here, add my elbow, like so. And what I wanted you to notice here is that by default, text has a masking option. So there is an opaque background on this piece of text. Now that is controlled inside the text type. So like other elements in Revit, you can select the object and on the properties palette is an edit type button. And when I click that, you can see that among several other settings is the background setting here. And the choices are opaque and transparent. So if you set it to transparent, now the brick shows right through. I think it actually reads a little nicer in this case, leaving it opaque, but I wanted you to see the two choices there. Now, there are other options here as well. You could make the text bold, you could make it italic, okay? But just be careful because if I make that change here in this dialog, remember that that is a type-based modification and that applies to all instances of that type throughout your entire project, not just this view, but everywhere. So that might be something that you want to think about a little more carefully and possibly duplicate and create a dedicated bold type or a dedicated italic type instead. So in this case, I'm simply going to turn those off and click OK. However, there is one change I want to make to the type that I do want to be global and I don't want to duplicate the type for, and that is the arrowheads. I'm not a fan of those open arrowheads. So what I'm going to do is change the arrowhead choice right here, and I'm going to choose a filled 20 degree. You can choose whichever one that you like, but I think that looks a lot nicer like so. Now, one last thing I want to show you. I'm going to add one more note and I'll do it with a leader and I'll just sort of point to the roof here. And I'm going to place this one a little bit randomly and then finish the note and click the modify tool to cancel. You're able to select multiple notes and on the ribbon, you will have some alignment options. So notice that we can align the elements to left or to right and center, and we can also align them in the horizontal and vertical directions. So for example, if I choose this center alignment option here, now all of those pieces of text are lined up based on their center. If I did right, they're going to move over there. And if I do left, they're going to move over there. So what you're able to do is just very quickly take a big collection of text and kind of rearrange them so that everything is lined up nicely. And then of course, they will continue to stay lined up as long as you pay attention to those alignment vectors when you're moving those around. So something for you to explore a little bit further.
When you start adding text notes to your Revit project, you may have some really long notes that are written in other programs. They could be in Microsoft Word and Google Docs, or even here in Windows Notepad. And it might be standard notes or code requirements, or really any kind of text information that you have outside of Revit. I just wanted you to see that you don't have to retype all this information in Revit. You could just simply copy and paste it from whatever program you're using directly into a Revit text object. Now, this notepad file that I have open here, the only thing I want to show you is if I go to Format, this first line is actually a paragraph. And if I turn on word wrap, you can see that it's a longer paragraph. And then I do have a few hard carriage returns here and here. And so the reason I wanted to point that out is I want to show you the way that Revit treats that information. So I'm going to select all of this text and do Control-C to copy it to my clipboard. Then I'm going to click anywhere into Revit, and let's just give ourselves some room here above the file, and I'll go to the text tool and I'll click a start point, and then I have leader turned on. Let me escape out of there. Let's turn off the leader and I'll just do text without a leader. So we'll click a start point, and then I'm just going to do Control-V to paste that in. So you can either close the text editor here or click away from it in empty white space. And what you'll notice is that long paragraph just went on and on and on over here, all the way over to the other side. Now you can use this little grip control here and start to drag this to reduce the width. And you can see that it's having an impact on that paragraph and word wrapping it just like it did in Notepad. If you don't want to have to chase down that other end of the note and drag it manually, what you can do instead is click and drag a box first. And then when you Control V to paste it, it will respect the width that you designated by dragging. So that's just a little tip for you there to make it easier to paste these things in. So now I'm going to cancel out of there, and it doesn't matter which one of these notes you edit next because they're both the same. So now I want to show you some localized formatting. So I'm going to double click anywhere in this note, and that puts me back in the text editor. So you may recall in the previous video that I mentioned if you wanted things like bold and italic that you would have to go to the type for the text and edit type, duplicate, and create a bold and italic type. And that's true if you wanted the entire piece of text to be bold or italic. But if you just want localized formatting on a word or two, you can actually modify it right here in this text editor. So I could select some text and bold it. I could select something else and italic it. I could select something here and underline it. So you have some of that local formatting. There's also cut, copy, and paste here. I've got this number 3 at the end, and I could make that a superscript. There's also subscript. So if you're doing footnotes and things like that, you can do that. If you select a word or even an entire paragraph, there is a all caps option here. So these are just some of the formatting options that are available in this simple text editor. If I select a list like I have right here, we have a few different list formats to choose from. We can do a bullet list, we can do a numbered list, a lettered list, lowercase letter. I'm going to go back to number, and you can see I've got item 1, 2, 3, but then I have these sub items here. So I'm going to select all of that and indent, and it will automatically switch to uppercase letters. I'm going to select this sub item and do it again. And now it's lowercase letters. So you do have some control over the formatting of that list there. Now, the space that it puts between the bullet and the number and the item, that actually is controlled in the text type. So if you come over here and click edit text type, I'm not able to edit that right now because I'm in the middle of editing the text. So let me OK here. Let's close the text editor. Then we can go to edit type. And now you can see it's editable, but it's the tab size right here that I want to modify. So in the imperial file, I'm going to put in 1/4 inch. If you're working in metric, you can use about 6 or 7 millimeters. And when you click OK, it will pull those tabs over a little bit and make them a little bit less dramatic. So that's just a few of the localized formatting options that you have available to you in the text editor. Now, Revit's text editor is not as robust as a word processor by any stretch of the imagination, but there are certainly some features in there that you can easily take advantage of when creating these longer notes. So feel free to explore that a little bit further. In this video, I want to revisit the topic of working views, and I want to do this in preparation to getting our file ready for documentation. So in the videos that follow, we're going to be adding dimensions and symbols, and we're going to be documenting our project. And I want to do that in views like the one that you see here on screen. This is our main architectural floor plan. But right now, this floor plan is showing some information that I really don't want to see in those documentation views. Now, assuming that you don't want to permanently eliminate some of the items that I'm going to share with you, then what you want to do is maintain a working view as well. Now, all a working view is another view of the model that you use to get your work done. So it is like a private view that you use for the day-to-day editing of the model that you don't share with outside recipients. And that's really all we mean by a working view. Now, the template file that we started this project with contained some working views in it already. So we don't even have to create any working views in this model. They're already here. So let me point them out to you. So I'm going to scroll down, and one of those views is on the sections branch. It's called sections working section, and you can see it right here as section 1. Now we've encountered this view before, it is this dash red section right here. And in an earlier video, we even hid that here in this main floor plan view. Now, to remind you how we did that, we simply went to the View tab, Visibility Graphics, and then on the Filters tab, we unchecked the visibility here to hide that in this main view. So that's something I wanted to remind you that we could do, but the presence of that working view, it's going to show up everywhere, but we can easily hide it should we want to do that. Now, the other working views that we have in this file are under coordination, under floor plans. There's a floor plans working branch, and here is a level 1 working floor plan. Now, I'm going to double click to open that up. Type WT to tile these two next to one another. And let's kind of compare and contrast now the differences between these two views. The two most obvious differences that I see are the walls are displaying their layer geometry here in this view. And that's because we've got medium level of detail turned on here. In our main floor plan, it's still set to coarse. Now, based on the scale of our main floor plan, I think coarse is appropriate for printing and for generating PDFs, but for working, we're not printing or PDFing from this view at all, so it might be nice to actually see that internal layer structure. The other thing that we're seeing here, which also might be nice for coordination purposes while we're working, is all the site plan information. But of course, we deliberately hid that information in the main floor plan. So those two things are already configured to our liking between the working view and the main floor plan. And then, of course, the working section that we just hid in the main floor plan is still displayed here. Now, one thing that is not configured to our liking or optimally at this point is the room separation lines. So if I zoom in both of these views right here, these orange dashed lines are room separation lines. And if you watch the video on creating rooms, then you know that we use room separation lines whenever we want to create barriers between two rooms in places where we don't have walls. So this room separator is defining the boundary between the corridor and the reception space. However, there's this misconception that just because we think of that as a temporary object, that it somehow means it won't print. That is not the case. In Revit, if you see it on screen, it prints. There's only a couple exceptions to that. Room separation lines are not one of those exceptions. So if you do not want to see the room separators when you print or PDF, you need to hide them. So the easiest way to do that is going to be to select the room separation line, come up here to this little light bulb, and choose Hide Category. That will hide the room separators in this view, but of course you can see they still remain in our working plan, which is exactly what we would want. So should you need to make some modification to the shape of your rooms, you could do so in the working plan. The rooms will update accordingly, and the main floor plan doesn't need to display them. So that's an example of having a category turned off in one view and on in the other for practical reasons. Now, just so you know where that setting is that we just did, you can go to Visibility Graphics, VG, scroll down and locate the lines category, and room separation lines are a subcategory of that. So when I right-clicked and told it to hide, it was just simply unchecking this box for us. I'm going to OK out of there. So the last thing I want to talk about is what I'm going to call working dimensions. Okay, so if we kind of zoom both of these out, you'll notice that there's very few dimensions in this working view. There is one string going across the bottom here, which I use to help me place those columns. But notice we don't see those dimensions in the main floor plan. They may not be where I want the dimensions to actually document those columns, so it's not necessarily the right dimension string to see there. Now, the same is true for dimensions like these. Remember, these dimensions were just a means to apply the constraint which keeps these doors set at an offset from these walls. Well, I don't necessarily want to include those dimensions in my documentation. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to select everything in the main floor plan, go to Filter, check None, and then pick Dimensions Only and click OK. I'm going to remove all of the dimensions from this view and move them over to the working view. And then in the next video, we're going to create a new set of dimensions specifically for the purposes of documentation. But initially, I want to take these dimensions and get rid of them and pull them off of this view. So to do that, I'm going to use the Cut to Clipboard. So I'm going to choose Cut to Clipboard, And that deletes all those dimensions, but puts them on the clipboard. And it's warning me that this might affect some constraints, okay? Things like lock constraints, labeled dimensions, and so on. You could unconstrain things, or you could simply click OK and accept that. I'm going to click OK. In doing so, that means that if you do the reveal constraints, those constraints are still there. All I did was remove the dimensions. And then I can come over here to the working view, go to the Modify tab, Paste dropdown, choose Paste Aligned to Current View, and all those dimensions will now be moved over to this floor plan. Now, the last sort of dimension thing I want to mention is there is a dimension type in this file for the purposes of checking values and making sure that the precision is correct. It is called dimension check right here. So I'm going to select this dimension at the front and choose this one with check in the name. And what you're going to see is they change color and they now have multiple decimal places. So the purpose of this dimension is to help you check distances. Sometimes these weird little fractional values creep in, and this dimension allows you to identify that. So if you discover one of those values, then you can use this dimension to help you fix it. And again, it really makes more sense to use that check style only in the working view. So now you have some examples of when you might want to set up a working view and what kinds of information it might contain. If you're working in your own projects and you don't have these default working views already set up, then you can simply right-click an existing view and duplicate it with or without detailing and then just call it a working view. So there's nothing special about a working view other than how you name it and how you use it. In this video, we're going to look at dimensioning a floor plan. Now, we're going to use the same dimension tool that we've used elsewhere throughout the course where we were editing our model. But this time, we're going to be placing the dimensions more with a mind towards documentation rather than editing. So it's the same tool, but the strategies will vary slightly. And I'd like to share with you a few of those now. So I'm going to zoom in over here on the right-hand side of the plan. And let's get started by just placing a really simple dimension in this location. So I'm going to go to the Align Dimension tool here, or DI. It's also available on the Annotate tab. Look at your options bar and make sure your settings are set to wall faces for this first drop down and individual references for this second one. And then I want to highlight the exterior face of the top wall and the exterior face of the bottom wall here. And then I will click just inside of the grid bubbles to place that dimension. So that's the basic mechanics of placing an individual dimension string. Now, of course, I've only selected 2 witness lines. That's the minimum. You need at least 2 witness lines, of course, but you can select more. So if I pick the same start point on this exterior wall, and then this time include the grid line 3.7, come down here and include grid line 2.4, and then finally the exterior wall here, you can create a dimension that includes as many witness lines as is necessary. Now, as you move around here before placing it, you should sense a location where it wants to snap. So there's a built-in offset in the dimension type itself, which will keep them spaced nicely relative to one another. So you can just sort of click when it snaps to that location. So that's the basic mechanics of placing simple dimensions. And if you just have a few witness lines, that approach can be perfectly fine. But in the case of creating dimensions along walls that have lots of witness lines, then there is a more efficient way that we can do it. So I'm going to go back to the dimension tool. And this time I'm going to change the reference here, the pick reference, to entire walls. Now, I want to dimension this entire vertical wall here, but notice that that's a stacked wall. So what you want to do is press the Tab key one time, and that will reach into the stacked wall and select the basic wall inside of it. Then I'll click, and notice that with a single click, it finds the length of that basic wall. Now, of course, I could click somewhere and place that dimension, and this one matches this one. But what you'd probably want on this innermost string is for it to also include this door opening. So I'm going to remove this one and do it again. So I'm going to go back to dimension. It should already remember entire walls, but this time I want to click the options button, and you can include the openings. So I'm going to click OK, tab into this wall, click it, and now you can see, let it snap here. Now you can see that it will not only do the length of the wall, but it will also include the center of that opening. Okay, so let's go to a different part of the plan here, maybe this little wing down here on the south portion of the building. And now what I'm going to do is go to options, and I'm going to create those 3 strings of dimensions that I did over there manually a little bit more efficiently using this tool. First, I'm going to uncheck openings and click OK. Move near this wall, press tab to highlight the basic wall inside the stacked wall, click, and I'll pull it out here maybe to place that overall dimension. I'll go to options next and choose intersecting grids, click OK, tab into the same wall, and notice that that will include the 2 intersecting column grid lines. Then I'll go back to options, choose openings, but this time I want to include the widths of the windows rather than the centers. Now I'm going to turn off intersecting grids, click OK, tab in, and pull it down like so, and you'll see it place that string of dimension. Let me click the modify tool to cancel. Now these are a little too close to the building, so I'm going to select all 3 of these dimensions and just use my nudge, which is the arrows on the keyboard, or you can hold the shift key down to nudge with a larger increment. And I'm just going to nudge these down to a more comfortable location like so. So that's the essential process that we're going to follow to create a 3-tier nested set of dimensions across this entire floor plan on several sides. So I'm going to zoom out here, and let's repeat that again over on this wall. So we'll go to dimensions, entire walls. The options should still remember the openings. So it doesn't matter if you start with the internal string or the external. In fact, using the internal string might be a little bit nicer because you can give it enough room away from the building that way. Then I will switch to no openings, intersecting grids, highlight this wall, press tab, and get it to snap. And then go to options and turn off intersecting grids, pick the same wall, and again, get it to snap. Now this time, the dimension is overlapping the bubbles a little bit, but remember you can use this little open grip at the end of the bubbles, and you can just sort of drag it just enough to get past that dimension string and make for a cleaner presentation like so. Now here at the top of the plan, I just want to point out that when you're using entire walls, you can pick more than one wall. So let's go to dimensions, and we're going to tab in to select this wall. And that starts to place a dimension at the length of just that wall at the top of the plan. But if I come over to this wall and click it, it will add that wall to the selection. And it's not necessary to hold any modifier keys down. So it will just highlight that wall and let you click it. So just like when you're in individual references mode, you're able to select multiple references. The same is true when you're in the entire walls option. So then you just start setting your additional options here. So we tab in for the first one, we click to select the second one, and then finally we do openings with widths without intersecting grids, tab in, select the second, and click to place it. If you want to fine tune the position of any of these, you can again use your nudge option. I think it's a good way to do this. And then of course, we can adjust the column grids as required. And there's nothing like adding some dimensions to a floor plan to really start making it look like a construction document. In this video, I'm going to show you the symbol tool. With the symbol tool, we can place any kind of graphics or symbols that are required by our construction documents. And we have all sorts of symbols that are used in architectural documentation. The symbol tool is best for elements that are not associated with the model in any way. In other words, non-hosted symbols. If you want a hosted symbol, then really what that is a tag. Okay, so the symbol tool is on the Annotate tab, and it's right here. And if we hover over that tool, it says that it places a 2D annotation drawing symbol in the current view. So it's two-dimensional, it's view-specific, which means that it's detailing, and it will also respond to the scale. So keep all those things in mind. I'm going to zoom in here, and maybe I want to mark where the center of this door is. So I'll go to the symbol tool. The center line symbol is the default on the type selector here. So I can just simply accept that and click somewhere to place it. If you needed it rotated, you can tap the space bar in 90-degree increments. And really, that is all there is to placing a symbol. Now, if I come back and I select this symbol, it has no properties here on the properties palette. However, there are some symbols that do. So now what I want to do is show you a couple symbols that are included in this file that have some properties and just talk about those real briefly. So I'm going to zoom back out and down here to the lower right-hand corner. So this file contains a north arrow symbol and a bar scale here, and both of those are symbols. They're both 2D annotations, but they contain properties. So this one, the north arrow, has a property that allows us to rotate the direction of north, and this one, the bar scale, has a property which allows us to adjust the scale factor. So let's start with the north arrow. I'd like to put in a value for the north angle. Trouble is, I don't know what I should put in. So we can easily figure that out by going to the site plan. So I'm going to expand floor plans site plan, double click the site plan view, zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to draw a detail line right along the edge of this sidewalk here, just to kind of give me that angle. Then I'm going to select that detail line, cut it to the clipboard. I don't want it in the site plan here. I'll go back to the architectural floor plan here, and I'll just do Control V to paste that into the view. You can place it anywhere that you like, and then just click anywhere to accept that. Now we're going to use the angular dimension tool to measure the angle from this horizontal reference plane to that diagonal line. Click somewhere to place it, zoom in, and you can see that it's just a little bit shy of 59 degrees. So all I need to do now is take my north arrow, click in the north angle, put in 59, press enter, and now you can see the angle is parallel to this line, and we've got it pointing in the correct direction. So I will take that line and delete it, and that completes our north arrow. As far as the bar scale goes, well, currently, this view is set to 1/8 of an inch equals a foot in this imperial file. If you're working in metric, it's at 1 to 100. I'm going to change that temporarily to 1/4 inch equals a foot, or 1 to 50 in metric. Now, what you should see happen immediately is the size of both of these symbols should adjust and get smaller. Okay, however, notice that the bar scale did not adjust to the new scale. So you have to do that manually by selecting it and then editing this scale factor. In imperial, I'm going to put in 48 because 1/4 inch equals a foot is 1 to 48. In metric, you would put in 50, and then the bar scale should update accordingly. Okay, so that's the way that that object functions. Now, I'm going to go to the undo drop down here and undo back the last 3 commands to change view scale to get everything back to either 1/8 inch or 1 to 100. Finally, at this point, once you've kind of got these configured the way you want, you don't need to do that over and over again per view. What you can actually do is just Control C to copy those 2 elements to your clipboard, and then go to any other plan that doesn't contain those items and simply paste them. So here is the architectural furniture plan, and I could do paste aligned to current view. Now, the power plan, when we originally created it, was created with detailing. So it already has these 2 symbols because remember, these symbols are considered detailing. So you could delete them and just paste them in again, or I could just simply select this north arrow and set it to 59 degrees. Either way, I'm going to get the same result. So those are your symbols. There are potentially more in the library. I welcome you to explore and potentially add some additional symbols to some of the other views in this file.
Architectural documentation often has legends that define certain standard symbols that you're using throughout your document set. And you might see those for symbology. You might see them for different types of doors and windows. So in this video, we're going to create a door types legend, and we're going to do so using a special kind of view that Revit has called a legend view, appropriately enough. So a legend view is unique in Revit in a couple ways. It's largely a drafting view, so it's very similar to any kind of drafting view where you're just going to use detailing elements to draw what you want to draw, but it has access to a special feature called legend components, which I'm going to show you. And also legend views have another benefit in that they are one of the few types of views that are able to be placed on more than one sheet. And we'll talk about that in a future chapter. So for now, let's just go ahead and compose the legend view and look at the basic functions of working in a legend view. So to get started, we're going to go to the View tab here, and the drop down for legends is right here, and you want to create a new legend. It will ask for a name, and it will suggest a scale. Now, here in the imperial file, it's suggesting 1/4 inch equals a foot. In the metric file, it's suggesting 1 to 50. I think that's fine in both cases, so just go ahead and click OK. This creates an empty view. You could think of it as a blank sheet of paper, and we're able to draft anything that we like here. Now, that means you could go to the Annotate tab, and you could use any of the annotation tools to draw whatever you'd like to draw here for the purposes of creating your legend. That includes detail lines and filled regions and masking regions and so forth, but it also includes components and this special kind of component called a legend component. So that's what we're going to focus on here in this video, is the legend component. Now, what is this exactly? Well, the interface for this is a little bit challenging, but what you have here is on the options bar, there's this very large drop-down list. And if you scan through that list there, what you're going to see is that every single loaded family in your project and every type of that family is listed here. So notice that we've got all our casework elements, and further down we have curtain panels, and there are door elements. Well, we're interested in doors here. Now, sadly, there's no search function, so you just have to scroll through the list and find the individual elements that you're looking for. So the first thing I want to do is place my first door type, which is going to be this door single flush 36 by 84 if you're working in imperial, and it's the 900 by 2100 if you're working in metric. When you choose that, you will see a symbol appear on your cursor. You can draw that symbol in one of 3 different renditions: plan view or front or back elevation. So I'm going to switch this to the front elevation, and it will change to that kind of view, and then I will just sort of click anywhere to place it. I'll go right back to the drop down for the families and choose my next door. So that is going to be the single vision light door, and it's the same size, the 36 by 84 or 900 by 2100. Now, if you pay attention here, you can get them to line up, but sometimes it will shift, and if it does, don't worry, we can come back later and realign them. So I wouldn't worry too much about the alignment just now. I would just worry about getting them placed on the screen first. The next one I want to choose is the door exterior single 2 light. Again, 36 by 84 or 900 by 2100 if you're working in metric. And then finally, we want the curtain panel door. So that's this one right here, curtain wall double storefront. Now, this one comes in a little bit strange when it comes in because curtain wall doors are sized a little bit differently than regular doors. So it turns out, however, if you cancel out of the command and you come back and select it, that there is this host length option right here. And with a little bit of trial and error, you can come up with a size that is acceptable for this legend. And so in my experiments, 7 feet works pretty well in the imperial file, and that's about 2100 in the metric file. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag this about where I want it positioned. Now I'm going to go to the Modify tab and my Align tool, or type AL, the keyboard shortcut. And what I want to do is pick the bottom edge of the first door, and that's going to be my alignment reference. And I want you to direct your attention to the ribbon right here where it says Multiple Alignment. And if you hold the Control key down on your keyboard, it will temporarily check that multiple alignment checkbox. Notice if I release Control, it unchecks. So you don't even need to check the box. Just simply hold Control down, pick this one, and then this one, and you'll notice that they're all now lined up nicely across the bottom. Okay. And then let's click the modify to get out of the align tool. All right, so those are our door legend components. Next, I want to add some dimensions. So the align dimension tool is right here on the ribbon, or you can type DI. And I'm going to place a vertical dimension right here, and then a horizontal dimension right there to mark the width and the height of my first door. I'm going to click the modify tool to get out of there. Now, you could accept the sizes that are displayed, and those are the actual sizes of the door, but you also can do this little trick. By selecting the dimension and then clicking right on the dimension text, that will actually take you to a dimension text edit window. And here you're able to choose this replace option and replace the text with whatever you'd like to say. So perhaps in the case of this legend, I would like it to say see schedule instead. Now I'm going to borrow this piece of text, Control C to copy it to my clipboard, and click OK. And notice that that now replaces the dimension value. I'm going to repeat that with this one. And if you do the value across there, it fits. But if you'd like to make it a little bit more readable, you could also use the below field here and do it that way. It's up to you, just whatever you think looks nicer. Now I'm going to select both of these dimensions and then go to copy, start right at that little endpoint right there and copy it to here and to here. Okay. And we can even try to copy it to here, but because it doesn't correspond to the same points, it's probably not going to work there. So that means for the last one, you'll just simply create those in the same way that we created the first ones. Okay. So next I want to add some text. So I'm going to go to my text tool and I'm going to give a description to this first door. Now I've got leader turned on there, so let me cancel out of there and go back in and do a text without a leader. And I will click somewhere to place the text, type in what I want it to say, and then maybe it's designation A. Now I can select both of these pieces of text and I can use the align center here to make sure that they're aligned centered to one another. And I'll just use the arrows on my keyboard to nudge that around. Now I'm going to also go to the annotate tab here, do a detail line and then a little circle. And I'm just going to draw a circle around that letter A there. Now, unfortunately, the alignment tools don't work with drafting lines. So that means you'll have to just settle for aligning this circle by eye around that letter A. So that alignment tool only works for text, but it's still pretty nice to have. So I could select all of this now and copy it. And I'll just do it from the midpoint of this door and place it in each of those locations and then just simply edit the text here. Now, as a final finishing touch to this legend views do support levels of detail. So we can choose fine level of detail and the hidden elements like the hardware will display. And then we could even call those out by adding another text note. I'll do this one with a leader. And that completes our legend view. So feel free to experiment further in this view or try your hand at creating a second legend view for a different category on your own.
In this video, we're going to begin a multi-step process of creating a construction detail. Now, the process we're going to outline is what I like to call the hybrid detailing process. Now, by hybrid, I mean that part of the detail will be live model geometry and part of it will be 2D drafted and embellishments that are placed on top of the view. And that means it's going to be a little bit drafted and a little bit live. Now, some may wonder why we would bother using any 2D detailing at all. I thought we were doing building information modeling after all. Shouldn't it all just be part of the model? Now, it's a fair question, but I'd like you to think about that question very carefully. If you just assume that everything should be modeled, what's going to happen is that you're going to find yourself modeling lots of extra detail that won't really yield very much additional benefit. And when you're done, you're going to have put in a lot of extra effort to create things that not only don't benefit you, in some cases, they could actually detract from what you're trying to do. Let me give you some examples. Theoretically, we could model every bolt and screw and mortar joint and piece of flashing that occurs in a building. And you could argue that those items are there and therefore they should be part of the model and they should be modeled in full 3D. And then we'll be able to schedule them and count them, and we will have all the information about them. It's true BIM. The trouble with this line of thinking is that the amount of effort that would be required to create all of those kinds of items and the time spent doing so would not really yield much payoff. Furthermore, you're creating a lot of extra detail and a lot of extra weight in the model that will slow things down potentially and really potentially take a hit on the model performance and the processing power that's required in your computer system. And in many views, you're going to want to hide all that extra information because it doesn't contribute anything to that view. In many views, you're not going to want to see all of that extra detail. So you're going to find yourself needing to hide those elements because it actually detracts from that view if it's there. And so you're spending all this extra effort to build that information into your model and then additional effort to hide it in many of the views throughout the project. So while at first the obvious answer might seem to be that we should model everything in 3D, when you start to think it through, hopefully you're going to start to see that it's not quite so easy all of the time. While there are certainly situations where you could benefit from modeling all these elements in 3D, in many places, the overall benefit will just not justify the amount of effort and the potential downsides that I mentioned earlier to modeling these elements. Now, certainly there are things that should be modeled all the time, so you want to consider it very carefully. Overall model geometry like walls and floors and roofs are things that make up the structure of the building. It is obvious that those things should always be modeled. They are going to exist in the model. They're going to show in all views. When we change them, we want to change them in one place and we want that change to occur everywhere. That's the benefit of BIM. But on the other hand, there are many small details like bolts and fasteners and flashing and mortar joints. We really just don't need to model that stuff in order to convey it accurately and communicate that information through our BIM. That stuff typically only needs to show in very limited views and often just in one view, a construction detail, and nowhere else. And we don't need to have it in full 3D in order to convey that information accurately. So as a general rule of thumb, if an item needs to show in multiple views, then yes, we should certainly model it. But when an item needs to show only in the construction detail, you should think carefully about it and decide whether or not it is worth modeling. Sometimes you will decide, yes, it is, but often you will decide that 2D detailing is sufficient to convey that information. Now, it will take time, but over time you will generate an intuition on this. So it's not going to be immediate, but as you do more of this, you will begin to understand when it makes sense to model something and when it makes more sense to just simply draft it. And so the hybrid approach allows you to do a little bit of both. It allows you to leverage the advantages of having a 3D model and then only supplement that model where necessary with the 2D elements as appropriate. So what we're going to be doing with the remainder of the videos here in this chapter is walking through the process of creating a hybrid construction detail. And we're going to approach it step by step. So we're going to start in the next video by creating a call-out view of the actual live model, and then we'll begin supplementing that with two-dimensional detailing. In this video, we're going to begin creating our hybrid detail, and it starts with a callout. So that is always going to be the first step, is creating some sort of a view of your live model. Then we'll make some basic adjustments to that view, and then that will be ready for us to start adding the detailing. but we're going to set up the view here in this video. So I'm starting in a section at stair, and the detail I want to create is going to be of the stair landing condition. So I'm going to zoom in generally in that area, and then I'm going to create a callout view of that location. So you may recall that the callout view has two options, rectangle and sketch. In this case, rectangle will work just fine. We don't need to sketch any kind of a custom shape. So I'm just going to make a rather generous rectangle here initially of the area in question. And then over here, you'll see the callout bubble appears as it normally does. And of course, we can open this view in a couple ways. You can double click the bubble. You can right click it here and choose go to view. And you can also locate it on the project browser and double click it there. Now, I want to show it to you on the project browser because the next thing I want to do before I even do anything else, before I even open it, is name it. Okay, so it's a really good idea to get in the habit of naming your views right as you create them, because stair section callout 1 is just not a great name. Okay, so I'm going to rename this and I'm just going to call it stair landing detail. So it's not really important what you call it, just so long as the name is descriptive enough that folks will understand what it contains, right? Now, if your office has some office standard for naming, you can follow that instead. So now I'm going to double click my stair landing detail. That's going to open it up. And what I want to show you is the most obvious thing that changed was back here in the original stair section, we were working at 1/8 inch equals a foot in imperial or 1 to 100 in metric. And now you can see the callout came in at twice that, 1/4 inch equals a foot imperial or 1 to 50 in metric. Now, I think for a detail like this, we probably want to increase that scale even further. So I'm going to go to 1.5 inch equals a foot imperial or 1 to 10 in metric. And the obvious thing that you'll see change in the view when we do that is the grid line here will get significantly smaller. Okay. Now, if we zoom in, another thing that has changed is the line weights have adjusted to match this scale. But if you zoom in close enough, you will see that where we're slicing through the stair is bolder than where we're looking at the stair beyond off in the distance. Okay, so the line weights are still being applied. It's just that you typically have to zoom in a little closer to see them. Okay, we've now got our basic callout. We've named it. We've set the scale. Now let's consider what the callout is showing. There's a lot of geometry visible in this view that I really don't need to see. Okay, so notice that there are some curtain wall mullions here, and there's some other similar pieces of geometry here. There's a stacked wall. Even this grid line, quite honestly, doesn't really contribute anything to a stair landing detail. So your first instinct might be to select the elements and go to visibility graphics and hide that category, or use the light bulb here and choose hide category. And if you're going to hide things, then definitely hiding by category would be preferable over hiding by element. But remember what we talked about back in the chapter on visibility. Don't start with how, in other words, hiding things or changing the way they look graphically. Start with what. What should be displayed in the view, and establish that first. And then if you get to a point where the elements that are displayed in the view aren't displayed correctly, then you can adjust how they display. So the issue isn't that we want to see mullions, but these mullions aren't displayed correctly. We don't want to see these mullions at all. So is there some way that we can remove them from the view entirely without having to change the graphical settings? And it turns out the easiest solution is to consider the crop itself. When I created this callout, I made it rather large, but you can come back and select this crop rectangle. It's got these little grip controls on it, and you are able to start adjusting this in all directions to control what's being seen in this view. Now, notice over here on the right, we can easily compress that in and remove all of that extraneous geometry off to the right without hiding anything. So we don't have to now figure out what categories to hide or anything like that. We're simply going to crop in closer so that we're focusing on what's important for this detail. Now, that takes care of the stuff off to the sides, but we're still seeing some of these mullions off in the distance. Well, remember that crop regions are not two-dimensional, they're actually three-dimensional. So the extent of the view is a three-dimensional extent. So in addition to the width and the height, we've got a depth here. and you can adjust the depth on properties. So we're going to scroll down here on the properties palette. And in the extents area, you're looking for the far clip settings. Now, the far clip offset is what we want to change, but notice that that's grayed out. And the reason it's grayed out is because the far clip settings can either be same as the parent view, the original view that we cut the call out from, or they can be independent. So that's what we want to do. We want to make this view independent, and now that allows us to select and modify the far clip offset. Now you can put in any value you want here. Let's put in something really dramatic like 6 inches in imperial or 150 millimeters in metric. And that's probably a little too much, right? Notice that I've certainly focused on the landing, but I've cropped out everything else. I'm not seeing any part of the stair, and we might want to see some of the stair for context, right? So you can essentially take an educated guess here and do a little trial and error. I've done that, and 4 feet in imperial or 1200 millimeters in metric works pretty well. And that crops out any of the geometry that's off in the distance that I don't care about, but it shows me enough of the stair that we've got the context we need for this detail. Okay. So that's a really effective way to adjust what we're seeing in the view. And I didn't have to do anything in visibility graphics. Now, again, I'm not saying visibility graphics is bad or should be avoided or anything. It's just that I want you to start with the view extents and then move to visibility graphics should it become necessary. It's not necessary in this view, so I'll skip that step. But in some details you create, you might then go to visibility graphics and start hiding things or adjusting the way they display. Okay, so we've now established the model extents, but there's a second rectangle surrounding this with a dashed line, and that is the annotation extents. So callouts actually have 2 crop regions. So the inner one, as you can see, is cropping the model. But what this outer one is doing, it only applies to annotation. And the easiest way to understand that is to just place some annotation. So I'm going to go to my text tool. I'll do a piece of text without leader. I'm just going to click in the middle of the screen somewhere and type a note that we can use later, like stair nosing, and I'll click away from it and then click modify to cancel. Now I'm going to grab that note. Let's zoom in just a touch so we can see this a little better. And using the little grip control on there, I'm going to start to drag it out toward the edge. Now, as long as you keep it within that dashed box, it will continue to display. But as soon as any part of that note touches the dashed box or goes beyond it, it will disappear. And that's what the annotation crop is designed to do. So, of course, you could select this and just widen that annotation crop and the note will come back again. But you can also ask the question, do I really need an annotation crop in this detail? It turns on by default, but you don't have to leave it on. And I don't think it really contributes much to this detail. So I'm going to scroll down here to extents, and annotation crop is right there. Just simply uncheck it. That dash box will disappear. And now this stair note can go anywhere that I'd like it to go, and it will not be cropped from the view. So any hybrid detail, any detail that is going to use model geometry is going to start with a view. It can be a call out, a section, whatever kind of view you like. Then you want to adjust the cropping and the visibility, potentially, visibility graphics. And then, of course, don't forget to name it carefully. In this video, we're going to continue working on our hybrid detail. I've got my callout all set up, and now I'm going to begin adding some detail components. Now, detail components are component families that just happen to be 2-dimensional families instead of 3-dimensional families. Now, they do represent real model elements, so they are drawn to scale at the correct size, but they're only going to appear in the view that you draw them in. So we're going to start off by adding a couple that are already loaded here in this file, and then we'll load a few additional ones from the Autodesk library. So I'm going to go to the Annotate tab, and the component button is a drop-down button which has 3 options, and it's possible that it might be set to one of the other options if you use that command last. So just make sure you're choosing this top option here, Detail Component. Then over here on the type selector, I'm going to choose this C shapes in section. I've already preloaded this, and there's just one size in the file. In Imperial, it's a C6 by 10.5. In metric, it is C255 by 45. So go ahead and choose that. And it won't appear out here because even though it's a 2D view specific element, it's still considered part of the model. So you need to move into the model view and place it somewhere. And I'm just going to kind of place it slightly overlapping that stair stringer right there. It's not important that you get it precise, just kind of place it roughly on screen for now. Go right back to the type selector, and there's another family in there called break line. Choose that next, and again, kind of move your mouse into the view window. And this is just a flourish for the detail. This is just sort of graphics. It allows you to kind of indicate that the view continues off screen, right? So it's just a standard kind of break mark thing. You can tap the space bar to rotate that in 90-degree increments. So I want to rotate it vertically, and I'm going to place it over here somewhere toward the left-hand side, and I want it just inside the crop region like so. Now I'm going to click the Modify tool to cancel out of there, and then notice that this break mark has some grip controls. So we can stretch it down here and up here so that it goes the full length of the detail. And then you can even adjust the shape of that little zigzag component there. I usually like to do that here on the properties palette by just typing in numbers. So this number left and right, those are the grips that I just stretched to change the length of the overall. But here, the jag depth and jag width is what you can adjust to start changing the proportion of the shape of the little zigzag shape there. So I'm going to reduce the width just a little bit. I like it to be a little narrower. So I'm going to use the same number for the depth, 2 inches imperial or 50 millimeters in metric should be pretty close. And then there's that break mark. Now, to really understand what that's going to look like, you might want to toggle off the visibility of the crop region. And so that's what it will look like in the final effect there. You'll just sort of have that break mark on the end. Now, if you want to add an additional one here at the bottom edge and along the top edge, you're welcome to do so. But I'm going to skip that for now and move on to some additional detail components. So I'm going to zoom in just a touch here, and we're going to place 2 more, and we're going to go to the Insert tab to do this, and I'm going to use the Load Autodesk family. So we've been here before. The first thing that you want to do is make sure that you're choosing the correct settings here for the little globe. So I'm in the English language and United States Imperial. There's also United States Metric and other locations. So choose the appropriate one for your preferences and what units you're working in. And then once I've done that, we can see that there's a detail items entry over here on the left-hand side. Now, you can browse through the folder structure here to locate the item you want. The item I want is in the steel folder, so it's under metals, and you've got structural steel framing. And there's AISC 14 and 15, so it's under AISC 15. And then finally, you can see a variety of different steel shapes. So we can browse to it that way. Of course, another way you can get there is to just simply search for it. So if I start searching for angle here, and that's going to make it a little simpler to find what we're looking for. So notice there's 2 angles here, one with unequal sides and one with equal sides. We're going to go with the equal sides, and then because these are 2D components, you're going to have 3 versions of each one. So there's a section cut, there's a side view, and a top view. So for this example, we're going to use a side view. So select the equal angles side, and when you load this, this family has a type catalog. Now, we've looked at type catalogs before, but just to remind you what they are, this is just a list of available types within this family. And I'm going to expand this a little bit bigger so that we can see more of the list. And notice that there are lots of sizes to choose from. So rather than load all of this and clutter up the file with a lot of stuff we don't need, you can focus on just the type or types that you're interested in. So in our case, we just want one for this example, but you can use the control key and select more than one if appropriate. But I'm just going to select the L 2x2 by 1/8 in imperial, or it is 51 by 51 by 3.2 in metric. So just choose that one size, click OK to load it, and then go back to the component tool. It should already be on your cursor here now on the properties palette. Now, this family in the imperial file is a 2-pick family, meaning you're going to click the start point and then the end point to draw out the length. If you're working in metric, you're just going to click and it's going to come in at a standard length. But in either case, when you're done, you can click the Modify tool, come back and select the element that you've drawn, and then you can change the length using the temporary dimension. So let's use 6 inches imperial or 150 millimeters in metric. Now, I'm going to take this thing and just sort of move it a little bit like so. And what I want you to see about all these components is they're similar to the break mark. They all have a mask behind them that starts to cover up the model geometry in the distance. And that's really one of the built-in features of detail components. You're embellishing your model with these two-dimensional components which show more detail. So naturally, you want them to cover up the model so that you don't see that model geometry coming through. We're going to leave these randomly placed for now and adjust their positions in a future video. So for now, just having them placed and at the correct size is all we need. And we just need one more detail component. So let's go back to Insert, Load Autodesk Family. And this time, I'm going to clear the search here. And I'm going to go back to the Detail Items branch so that I'm seeing all detail items. And then I'm going to search for the word stair. Now, when you do and press Enter, all of these items pertain to stairs, and there's one called Stair Steel Pan in Section. That's the one we want to load in. Now, this one does not have a type catalog, so when it loads, it's a much simpler family with really only one type, and if you go to Component, it will put it on your cursor, and all you want to do is just kind of line it up with the top of one of the existing treads in the stair. Click the Modify tool to cancel. And then I'm going to go ahead and move this one into position using the Move tool and this endpoint at the back of the tread there and snap it right to that location. Okay, so you can still see that there's some work to do. The proportion of that doesn't match quite yet. And of course, some of the other elements we haven't positioned yet. All of that will be what we will pick up with in the next video. In this video, we're going to continue where we left off in the previous one, and we're still working on our stair landing detail. Now, in earlier videos, we created the callout around the model geometry. Then we've supplemented that model geometry with some detail components that you can see in these locations here. And I'm going to focus initially on this detail component right here, which represents the stair nosing and tread condition. And we're actually going to use an array to duplicate that down the length of the stairs. Now, before I array it, I'm going to adjust its proportions because, as you can see, it doesn't quite match the actual stair. The easiest way to tell what it should be is to select the stair in the model. And this is one of the advantages of doing a hybrid detail is you've got the model right there, so you can use the information from the model to help you. And in the imperial file, you can see that the actual riser height is 6 and 171/256 of an inch, and the actual tread depth is 11 inches. In metric, that's going to be the actual riser height of 176.5 and the actual tread depth of 275. Now, I recommend that you write those numbers down because now we're going to need that information when we modify this family type. So we're going to select this item and then go to Edit Type. And at this point, it's up to you. You could do duplicate to create a custom type, but since this is the only place I'm going to be using this family in this model, I think it's perfectly fine to just simply modify it. So in the imperial file, I'm going to type in that strange fraction, which was 171/256 of an inch. Make sure you put the inch symbol here. And then the tread is already 11 inches, so that's fine. And then, of course, if you're working in metric, it's 176.5 and 275 for the tread. Click OK. And now you should see the proportion of that element adjust to match the stair there. However, you'll notice that the place that I positioned it is not quite matching. So I'm going to take the front of this item and drag it back to there so that it matches where the nosings actually occur on the stairs. So now that I've got that element positioned correctly and proportioned correctly, now I'm going to move on to the array. So let me just zoom out a little bit here. The array tool is a multiple copy tool. Keyboard shortcut is AR. And when you select that command, all of its options will be on the options bar. So there are two kinds of arrays. You can do a linear array or a radial array. A radial array would go around a curve. So naturally, in this case, we're going to leave it set to linear. Next comes group and associate. You want to leave that turned on. That's going to leave the array parametric, meaning that later you can come back and adjust the settings and it will impact all instances of the array. So it's literally using the group feature that we've discussed in earlier videos. The quantity of arrayed items is here. And I'm going to start with a quantity of maybe 4. That should be enough to cover up all of the stairs here. And then you can either move the second or the last. Now, what that means is think of second as setting the distance between the arrayed items, and think of last as setting the total size of the array, and it will fit them all in between. So in this case, second is the appropriate choice because we know the size of one stair tread, and we're going to use that as the size for the array. Now, the easiest way to do that is directly on screen. So what you want to do is snap to some convenient location in the model, and then move and snap to the corresponding location on the next tread down. So I did the back endpoint on the upper tread there, and I'm going to go to the back endpoint on the one below it, and that will array along that diagonal. Now, if you moved horizontally or vertically, then you'd get a linear or vertical array, but I got a diagonal array because of the direction that I moved in. Now, somewhere on screen, you should be seeing a dimension with the quantity that you specified. So one of the advantages of this grouped and associated array is you can adjust this quantity after the fact and notice that it will either add or remove elements. So if I went to 2, you can see that removes some of the elements. If I go to 5, it adds new ones. Now, you can see that they're kind of going off screen there because remember that detail components, even though they're 2D elements, are still being controlled by the crop region of this view. So even though I did 5, items 4 and 5 are actually going off the screen and being cropped. All of this only occurs in this view. And we mentioned that before, but just to kind of make sure that you understand that, if I go back to the original parent view here, section at stair, notice that none of those detail components appear here. We're not seeing the arrayed stair treads. We're not seeing the elements we left floating over here. So I'm going to close that view and go back to our detail. Everything that we're doing is just here in this detail. Now what I want to do is add this component, this little angle, to each of the stair treads. And that's going to be another advantage to this group and associate idea. If you hover over one of the stair treads, you're going to see that it is a grouped element. It's got that little dash box around it. When I select that element, Edit Group will be available here on the ribbon. We're going to click that. Now, the last time we edited a group, we were using a model group. This is a detail group, but it works the same way. So now what I want to do is use this add tool right here to add an element to the group. And I'm going to add in our angle element right there. And then I'm going to click the modify tool to get out of add mode. Now, this item is part of the group, but it's in the wrong position. So I will simply move it from its midpoint right there to the midpoint along the bottom of our stair element. I'll click finish, and when you do, it will add that to each of the arrayed elements. And so that's one of the advantages of using an array here, is that you get that group functionality and you're able to repeat those elements easily in that fashion. Now, this item I'm just simply going to move to a more favorable location, and using the temporary dimension here, I'll set that to a distance of maybe 2 inches in imperial and 50 millimeters in metric. So that completes our arrayed stair treads. In the next video, we'll add the final finishing touches to the geometry of this detail in the form of masking and filled regions. In this video, we're going to add some filled and masking regions. Now, both of these share in common the property that they are custom shapes that you draw from a sketch that will cover up the model geometry underneath. We've actually got examples of both of them already here in the file. The brake line family that we created earlier has a built-in masking region, and you can see when I select it that the geometry is kind of showing through it. So that mask is covering up part of that geometry to give us the desired visual effect. And the stair nosing detail element here has a built-in filled region for the concrete pan there, and you can see that it's got the little stipple pattern and so forth. So the only real difference between a filled region and a masking region is whether or not it has a hatch pattern. Now we're going to create one of each of these here in this video, and rather than do it inside a family like those two examples, I'm going to just build them directly on the view here. So let's start with a masking region. What I want to do is cover up some of this stair geometry that's behind the detail components that doesn't really contribute to the detail. So I'm going to go to annotate, and you've got this region tool here, and you can do either a filled or masking region. So I'm going to start with masking region. That puts me in sketch mode, and you can just start drawing, but I think it'll be easier to use the pick lines and just sort of use the underlying model geometry and basically trace over it. So I want to use an appropriate line style. So it's already set to thin lines. I think that's going to be fine for this example. And I'm going to touch this edge, this one, and this one. Now, those go off screen there. So what I'm going to do is just switch to the line tool and just draw a vertical line past the break line here. Click the modify tool to cancel, and then I'm going to do trim and extend to a corner and clean that up. So it is like other sketches that needs a closed shape before you can continue. So I've got that now, and I can click the finish edit mode button here, and that creates the shape. And notice that it is being cropped by the view. So that extra bit off to the bottom there was just to finish the sketch, but when we're done, it will look something like this, but you're probably thinking, well, that doesn't look so good. Well, the next concept that I want to talk about is stacking order. So when you have these detail components in a view, you get to determine which one sits on top of the others. So the easiest thing to do is just select one of the elements, and then you've got the arrange buttons here, and you can either bring them to front or send them to back. So in this case, I want to take this masking element and send it all the way to the back. That's going to put it at the bottom of the pile. And notice that all of the other detail components will jump forward now relative to it. And when I deselect it, it looks like that. So notice that send to back doesn't mean send it behind the model. The model is always underneath the detailing. So the detailing always sits on top of the model, and the stacking order is just relative to other detail elements. When we consider our stair pan array here, it was created after the break lines. So that break line is underneath the stair pan. You can use a similar tool here to bring that break line to the front. And now that looks a lot better, right? Because now that break line is covering that extraneous piece of the array. Okay, so using your send to back and move to front buttons, you can shuffle these things around to make for a more convincing graphical appearance there. Okay, so next I want to focus on the landing itself. And what we're going to do here is use a filled region. And I want to make a filled region that kind of looks like this stair pan to represent the landing geometry. So I'm going to go back to the region dropdown, choose a filled region. And then once again, we can choose the pick lines tool to be able to trace some of the existing geometry. But since we're going to be cutting through this element, rather than thin lines, I want to use something a little bit bolder. Now, I think wide lines might be a little too thick for this example, so I'm going to start with medium lines and see what that gives me here. And I'm going to pick this top edge, this one here. I'm going to use the top of the piece of steel right there, and then I'm going to zoom in near the steel pan. And in addition to the standard line types, the dash lines, the heavy lines, the thin lines, you also have an invisible lines. So when it touches this existing detail element, I don't want a bold line there. So I'm actually going to use invisible lines to grab that shape. And then you got to zoom in nice and close and get this little vertical line right there too. Okay, because remember, you have to have an enclosed sketch. So now I'm going to do trim and extend a corner and trim this item back to that little vertical line and trim this diagonal line to this one. And then finally this one to the one over here running vertically and close it up there as well. And when we click finish, that will complete the shape. And it's assigning it to a crosshatch initially, but you can just simply select it and choose a more appropriate fill pattern from the list here. However, you'll notice I don't have a concrete one, so let's just make one. So we'll click Edit Type. We will duplicate. I'll call it concrete. We'll click OK, and then just change the fill pattern here to concrete. And you can even just search for it. There it is right there. And I'll choose OK, OK again. And now that has the correct fill pattern. So those are the filled and masking regions. Now we do have a few more finishing touches to do to complete this detail, and that will be the subject of the next video. So there's still a few more things we need to do to finish up this detail. In this video, I'm going to focus on adjusting some of the graphics and adding some notes to finish up the detail. So as far as the graphics goes, we're going to look at a tool that we've discussed previously, and that is the line work tool. And I want to show you a few ways we can use the line work tool to enhance this detail. The one area that could use a little attention is the ends of these railings here. Revit doesn't always do a very nice job in rendering curves in elevation and section views, as you can see there. So those pipe railings are round in 3 dimensions. So not only are they round in the section cut that we're seeing here, but they're also turning the corner and rounded. And so you can see that the edge is just losing some of its definition there. So we can fix that in some cases with the line work tool. So I'm going to go to Modify, choose line work or LW, and pick a line style. So thin lines, I believe, is going to match what we already have here. And then I'll zoom in nice and close so you can see this take shape. You should be able to click right on that rail and then just simply fill those areas in where there are gaps. Now you could also do it across the bottom right here. You can see there's some gaps there. So it's a nice way to kind of clean up areas where the geometry is not rendering perfectly on its own. So we can just do a couple of those, and down here as well. And I think that looks a whole lot better. Okay. Now, staying with the line work tool, sometimes folks like to show the treads and risers of the opposing run of stairs dashed in behind the stringer. Now, I can't see those edges right now in order to do that. So I'm going to cancel out of the command. I'm going to temporarily change this view to wireframe. And you may recall that wireframe just shows all the geometry right through. Nothing is hidden. Now, let's zoom in nice and close here on these tread conditions. Let's go back to the line work tool, and let's change this to a dashed line, or a hidden line. There's a hidden line type right here. And then I'm just going to start touching some of these edges. Now, this one goes a little too long, so you can stretch it back. Remember, we did this in an earlier video. So this is hopefully review for you, but I will just go ahead and continue this. And then when we're done, we can cancel the command. And then to see the final result, you just change this back to hidden line, and it should look something like that. Now, if you missed one, like I did right there, you can simply go back to the line work tool, touch the same line again. That will redisplay the little grip, and then you can adjust it and fix that. So real easy to fix if you miss one. And I think that looks a lot nicer. So that completes the graphics of this detail. And then really all it needs is some notes and possibly some dimensions. Now you can use dimensions in this view just like you can in any view. So if you want to indicate the size of items, like maybe the offset of the stringer off the nosing, you can do that. And then, of course, you can add notes just the same way that we did in the videos where we talked about that, complete with leaders. And when you're done, it might look something like this. Now, if you're interested in this detailing approach and you want to dig in a little bit further, I've got an entire course here in the library devoted to the subject of detailing in Revit, and I welcome you to check that out. This chapter is devoted to creating a custom piece of family content. We will do this in an environment called the Family Editor. The subject of the Family Editor is a vast topic that could easily take up an entire course. In fact, we have several such courses devoted to the Family Editor right here in the library, and I've authored several of them, including the following, ordered from beginning level to advanced level. I also frequently feature specialized Family Editor concepts, as well as many other general Revit topics in my weekly series called Revit Tips, Tricks, and Troubleshooting.
And the family editor is also well covered in both of my books, Revit Essentials for Architecture, where there's an entire chapter devoted to the family editor, chapter 11, and Renaissance Revit, which I frequently like to refer to as a deep dive into the family editor. And those are just the courses that I author. There are several other excellent choices by my fellow authors here in the library. So after you're done with this really simple overview of the family editor in this chapter, and if you're still interested in learning more about families in the family editor, I recommend that you check out some of these resources. But back to the focus of this chapter. What I aim to do here is give you a high-level overview of how the family editor works and some of the standard best practices in which to follow. So let's start with some of the assumptions. I'm assuming that we want to create a model element family and that we want that element to be parametric. And by parametric, I mean that we want it to be flexible in some way. Now, those assumptions are important because they will influence the way that we approach the creation of this family. There are many kinds of families in Revit, and here's just a short list. And any of these can be parametric or not. If you're creating a detail element family or a symbol family, and you're creating one that doesn't need parametric behavior, then you might not need to do all the steps that we will showcase here in this chapter. So I just wanted to point that out so that you can keep that in mind. But assuming that you do want to make a flexible element or a parametric family, then here are the basic steps that you will typically follow. First, you want to choose an appropriate family template. This will impart certain overall basic behavior on your family, like its category and hosting behavior. Next, you'll typically add reference planes. These establish the framework or overall structure of the family. It's similar to the project environment where we use levels and grids to form the overall structure, but in the family editor, reference planes are going to serve this purpose. Next, you'll add dimensions to those reference planes, and we typically assign either parameters or constraints to the dimensions. Both can be thought of as rules that govern the family as it flexes or transforms. A parameter is a rule or a behavior that can be edited by the end user from within the project. This means that the end user will be able to manipulate that parameter and thereby change the overall configuration of the family in some way. A constraint, on the other hand, is a rule that the end user cannot manipulate. So it's built into the family, or it becomes a fixed rule, not variable. I like to think of both constraints and parameters as adding smarts to the family. Once you've created this flexible framework, we then turn our attention to building the geometry. So we have an awful lot of setup to do before we ever get around to creating geometry. But once we've built all that framework and made sure that everything is working correctly, then usually the making of the geometry ends up being the easy part. Finally, and perhaps the most important thing that we can do while working in the family editor is flex and flex often. Flex is Revit's word for test it out. We're making a flexible element family, therefore we want to flex it often to make sure that it's functioning properly and it doesn't break in some unexpected way. You want to flex often as you work through your family editor exercise. This is the best way to catch issues as they occur and solve them right away, so flexing often is critical. That summarizes the basic workflow that we're going to follow. So now all that remains is for us to jump in and start creating our first parametric model family.
In this video, we're going to begin a multi-step process to create a custom pool table family. In each video in this chapter, we'll walk through a different step in the process of creating this family. And in this video, we're going to start by just simply choosing an appropriate template for building the family and getting it set up and configured the way that we want. So I'm starting here on the home screen, and over here on the left, you have buttons to either open an existing family or create a new one. So what we want to do is create a new one. So I'm going to click that. Now that should take you right to a collection of template files in a folder. Mine went to the English Imperial folder because that's the version that I'm working in. If you're working in metric, it should have gone to that location. If for some reason it did not go to a folder like this and does not show you a list of templates. The template that I'm going to be using for this family, I've provided with the exercise files in a folder called OTB, so you can access it from there instead. Now, what I'd like you to do first is single click, don't double click, single click the first item on the list here and note the preview window over on the right. And then just use the down arrow on your keyboard and start moving through the various templates. And all I want you to see is that every one of these is actually quite different. Now, when you look at the names of the families, the name is telling you two important pieces of information. It's telling you the category, which is probably the most important thing, but it's also telling you the hosting behavior. So I'm going to stop here at these electrical items. And you can see that there are 3 electrical fixture templates. There's an electrical fixture ceiling-based, an electrical fixture wall-based, and then just simply an electrical fixture. So the difference is that this electrical fixture template would create a non-hosted family, one that does not require a host, where this one would require a wall host and this one would require a ceiling host. So we're not going to get into hosted families in this exercise, but it is something to be aware of if you start getting serious about creating family content. Then you definitely want to consider that. And the choice you make here is kind of important because it's rather difficult to adjust hosting behavior later. It's a little easier to change the category later, but just the same, it's a good idea to select an appropriate category right from the start. So in our case, we're making a pool table, so I think the furniture category is the best choice for that. And there's only one template for furniture, so it makes our choice easy. We don't have any hosted furniture templates in this case. So I'm going to select that and click Open. Okay, so we're now in an environment called the Family Editor. And I want to show you some clues how you can tell that you're in the Family Editor. The first is on the ribbon. You'll notice that we've got this Forms panel here, and there are several shapes that you can draw. So that usually appears when you're in the Family Editor. Next, on the Properties palette, it'll tell you you're in a family right here. So in this case, it says Family Furniture, but it would say a different category if you've opened up a different template. But the fact that it says Family indicates that we're in the Family Editor. Now, the Family Editor does have a project browser, just like the project environment does, but it's usually much simpler. So if you look at the views that are available here, you can see that it's a much simpler collection of views than what we've seen in other files that we've been in. And then finally, probably the easiest way to tell that you're in the Family Editor is the presence of this Family Editor panel here on the ribbon. And the interesting thing about that panel is it will persist regardless of which ribbon tab you're in. So if I choose a different ribbon tab, notice that I continue to have that Family Editor panel to the right. Now I'm going to go back to the Create tab. Now, this particular template that we opened, the furniture template, actually opened up with 4 separate views. So notice that I have a right elevation view, I have a 3D view, I have a front elevation view, and I have a ref level floor plan. Now, each of the views is showing at least some reference planes in a level, except for the 3D view. That one is empty. So I think it might be nice for orientation purposes to go ahead and turn on the levels here. So let's click on the View 1 3D view. Then we're going to go to the View tab and Visibility Graphics, or type VG. So it's just like in the project environment, Visibility Graphics, except that when you get here, it's much simpler. There's only a few things that you can control. Let's go to Annotation Categories, turn on Levels, and click OK. Now, initially, you're not going to see anything change, but if you come over here to the View Cube over on the corner of the screen and click the top corner, it will spin the view around, and then we will see the level displayed there. Now, what I'd like to do is tile all of these windows on screen next to one another. It's not required that you do that, but it can be a nice way to work in the Family Editor. So also on the View tab, if you click the Tile Views or type WT, then you'll see that we now have 4 tiles. And then finally, using the flyout on the navigation bar and choosing Zoom All to Fit, or you can type the keyboard shortcut of ZA. We're now going to zoom each of the views so that we can see everything in those views. So at this point, that's the basic setup. We've got the template. We've configured it the way we want. So let's go to File menu and choose Save. Now, because this is the first time we're saving it, it's actually performing a Save As. You can place this file wherever you like. I'm going to put it on my desktop. You can call it whatever you like. I'm going to call it pool table. And this next thing is optional, but I like to do it. When I'm working on a family, I like to create a version number. This allows me to save a particular version at one state and then go off and try something else. And then maybe if I don't like that, I can go back to the original version easily enough. So I'm going to call this V1 for now. And eventually, when you settle on the final version, you can remove the version number from the name, and we'll do that in a future video. But before we save this, let's click the Options button here. And there are some options we can configure. So we've seen maximum number of backups before in the project environment. I think in the family environment, we can set that to 1. There's really no reason to have lots of backups of this family, but this is up to you. If you would prefer to have more backups, you can leave that set to whatever number you like. But the really useful thing here is the thumbnail preview. So what I want to do is set the source of this to the 3D view, and then I'll check this box to make sure that it regenerates that. We'll click OK. We'll save it. And so now whenever this file saves, it will save with the 3D view, regardless of which view we left active. So that completes the creation of the family from a template and the initial save. In the next video, we will move on to the next step of the process. In this video, I want to show you what happens when you save a file with multiple open views. So before we continue working on our pool table family, I thought it would be useful to go through this because it could be a time saver if you know how to save the file with multiple views open already. Otherwise, when you close a file, if you don't know the trick, you'll have to reopen each of the views that you want to work with each time you open the file. So I'm going to reopen my pool table V1 file from the recent files right here. You can see it's listed there. If yours is not listed there, then you can just do open family here and browse to it wherever you saved it. But since mine is right here, I will just simply click on it to open that file up. Now, notice that it came in with 4 view tabs across the top. Before I get to those 4 view tabs, I want to talk about the 3D view because it did open with my 3D view active, but it's looking at it like head on from the front view here. And I want to adjust that too. So there's 2 things we're going to look at in this video. So what I'm going to do is just kind of click this top corner of the view cube here to orient that more to an axonometric orientation. If you want to preserve that the next time you open the file, what you need to do is right-click the view cube and choose Save View. So that's the trick to preserving the orientation of the view, but there's one small gotcha that I want to make you aware of. If you're using the default 3D view, so if you click the little birdhouse here and it creates that view with the curly brackets in the name, you won't be able to save that. So if you choose Save View, it's going to force you to rename it. So just something to be aware of. I don't care in this case. Actually, I'm going to delete the default 3D view, and I'm fine with just working with this one called View 1. Okay, so getting back to the question of the multiple views open, let me show you what happens if you don't save this correctly. I'm going to go to the File menu here and choose Close. When I do, it's going to ask me if I want to save my changes to the version 1 pool table. I'm going to answer yes. Now, it's still listed right here. It looks exactly the same, so it doesn't appear like anything has changed. But notice what happens now if I reopen this file. I only have View 1 open. Now, it did remember the orientation that I asked for, so that's at least a little bit of an improvement. But now, if I wanted to work in the floor plan and the elevation views, I'd have to reopen those views. Now, it may not be a big deal to you, so if that's the case, don't worry about it. But it sure can be nice if you have a collection of standard views open when you open up the view. So what I'm going to do is reopen all of the views that were previously there. Then you want to activate the one that you want to be predominant, let's say. And then finally, here's the trick. If I want this file to reopen with those 4 views again the next time I close and open it, I need to make sure that I go to the View tab and tile it before I save. Now, you don't have to zoom. It's not necessary. You can if you want to. But all you need to do is make sure you save it in this tiled state. So I'm going to click Save here. Then I'll go to File, choose Close. Close the file, and now watch the difference. When I reopen the pool table, now it will open with the 4 views. So as you work through the family editor exercise, if you're closing and opening files, I just wanted you to be aware of that if you're wondering why my files open up on screen with multiple tiled views and I'm able to just simply do WT and yours is coming in with only one, it's because perhaps you click the little X here. So it's very important that you don't X out these views as you're closing. Just simply keep it tiled, save the file and close it, and you should be good to go. In this video, we're going to begin laying out the framework that we need to drive the geometry in our family, and that is done with a series of reference planes that are driven by dimensions that are either constrained or parameterized. So we're going to look at all of that here in this video. Now, I'm working in this file that has 4 tiled views. If you're not sure how I got here, then I recommend you go back and watch the earlier video where I discussed how to save files this way and how to reopen them. So what I want to do is jump right in and start talking about reference planes. And I'm going to work in the ref level floor plan view. So just click anywhere in this view. And then let's start with these 2 reference planes right here and here. If you're not able to highlight or select them, then it's very important that you use this little drop down here underneath the pointer tool and make sure that select pinned elements is turned on. Notice that these 2 reference planes both have a push pin on them, and the push pin is used to prevent you from changing the element. We won't be able to move it, rotate it, delete it. And that's important because both of these reference planes are indicating where the origin of this family is. And you probably don't want that to move in any way. Okay, now what we're going to do is create our own reference planes to begin defining the extent of this family. So to do that, let's go to the Create tab. And you want to use this reference plane button here. RP is the shortcut. Make sure you're choosing reference plane, not reference line. Those are not at all the same thing. So pay close attention, make sure it's reference plane that you're choosing. So I'm going to start above the existing reference plane over here to the right, and I'm going to inset just a little bit and then draw this horizontally like so. There's a dimension that appears right here. I will click to edit that dimension, and in the imperial file, I'm going to use 2 feet in metric. That would be 600 millimeters. There's also a label right here that you can edit that says click to name. So I'm going to do that and call this back edge and enter that. So now I'm still in the reference plane tool. I'm going to start just above and to the right of the endpoint over here, click and draw it straight down this time. Edit this dimension, make that 4 feet imperial or 1200 millimeters in metric, and then click to name, and I'll call this left edge. Now you could continue in this fashion to create right edge and front edge, but I prefer to use the mirror tool. So I'm going to click the modify tool to cancel out. I'm going to select the back edge, go to mirror pick axis. I'm going to use the center line as the mirror axis, and that creates a new reference plane at the correct distance, but I do want to change the name to something more appropriate like front edge. And then let's repeat for this vertical one, mirroring it around this reference plane and calling this right edge. So those are the reference planes that will ultimately define the overall size and shape of our pool table. But at the moment, those reference planes are just randomly placed and could easily be moved anywhere that you like. Now I'm going to undo that. Okay, so what I want to do now is start pinning down their behavior a little bit and making it a little bit more predictable. So we're going to do that with dimensions. It's the same dimension tool that you use in the project environment, aligned dimension, or you can type DI. I'm going to create a total of 4 dimensions here. The first one is going to go from left to center to right, and I'll just place it up here somewhere. Then I'm going to do one from left to right and place that above the previous one. Then let's repeat in this direction, from back to center to front, and then from back to front, and we'll place it here. Let's click the modify tool to cancel. And as you can see, the text is a little small, difficult to read right now. Turns out that in the family editor, you can change the scale to anything you want because nobody's ever going to see these views. These views are only here for the family editor. So I'm going to increase the scale to 1/4 inch equals a foot and then zoom in a touch. And now I can read everything a little bit better. If you're working in metric, you can use 1 to 50. Okay, so we've got dimensions, but they're still not driving the geometry yet. Notice that I can still move the reference plane freely, and all that happens is the dimensions will update. So I'm going to undo that. So what we're going to do is select the lower dimension here and toggle on its equality. Now doing that will now add a constraint to the behavior of the reference planes. So if I grab this reference plane and I move it now, notice that the other one moves the equal and opposite amount in the other direction. Okay, so now we're starting to make some progress. I'm going to undo, and then let's toggle on the equality for this guy as well. And then what we need to do is take the two numbered dimensions that remain and turn those into parameters. Now, the way we do that, we've already covered this process earlier in the course when we created something called a global parameter back in the project. The process is almost identical here in the family editor. So instead of labeling this dimension with a global parameter, that's in a project environment, we're going to label it with a family parameter. But the interface is the same. Notice the label drop down here. We don't currently have anything to choose from, so we're going to go right to this icon where we can create a new parameter and apply it as a label to this dimension. So I'm going to call this new parameter length. I'm going to leave it set as a type parameter, but I could toggle it to instance if I wanted to. We'll talk about that later. I'll click OK, and let's do the same thing with the 4-foot dimension or 1200 millimeter if you're working in metric. Let's create a new parameter, call it width, leave it type, click OK. And now finally, we can test the behavior of both of those parameters by simply selecting the dimension. That will activate the text. Click right on the text, type in a new value. I'll do 6 in imperial or 1800 millimeters in metric. Let's try the width now. I'll do 2 in imperial or 600 millimeters in metric. And assuming that the reference planes moved how you expected and the size of that rectangle got smaller and changed proportion, then congratulations, you have created your first parametric family. Now, there's still plenty more to do, so we're going to pick up right here in the next video and move on to the next step. In this video, we're going to discuss family types. Now, if you think about the hierarchy of elements in Revit that we talked about earlier in the course, every element has a category, it has a family, and it has a type. So we've been working on a pool table family here in this chapter so far, and the category for our pool table is furniture. And then the pool table version 1 is the current incarnation of our family. But so far, this family doesn't have any types. So let's discuss that a little bit and then talk about how to create some types. So let's consider some of the out-of-the-box families you might be familiar with, like this Corbu chair right here. If you have this chair, you may have noticed that when you select it and look on the properties palette that there is only one entry beneath the family and it has the same name as the family itself. So it's going to say Chair Corbu twice, essentially. Well, what's going on there is that inside that family, in the family editor, that family does not contain any types. So if you have a family like the Corbu chair with no types in it, then Revit will create one on the fly when you load it into a project because every object has to have a category, a family, and a type. So it will just simply make one and it will use the same name. So if you've ever wondered why sometimes you see the same name twice, that's usually why. There aren't any built-in types. Now contrast that to a family that does have built-in types, like this coffee table right here. When you open the type selector, you will see a list of available types there beneath that family. And you can see in this case that it's easy to switch from one size to another. And this is what it would look like in the family editor environment. You'll now see a list of types at the top of this family types dialog, and you'd be able to choose each one and configure its settings. So what we're going to do is switch over here to Revit now and create some family types for our pool table family. Now you can do that in this dialog right here. So it's on the properties panel. The button is called family types. And when you get here, it will display this window. So at the moment, this one looks like that Corbu chair example that I showed you a moment ago. The type name list at the top is grayed out. There aren't any types in this family. Now you will see some parameters listed here, and notice that that includes the 2 parameters that we created in the earlier video. What's interesting about this is if you select one of them by name, it will highlight in orange back in the view window. And then you even have some control over those parameters down at the bottom here. You could use this pencil icon to edit them. You could create new ones. You could delete them if they're no longer necessary, copy them, and then even change the order with these up and down buttons. So we're not going to do any of that right now. What we're going to do is stay focused on the top here, the type name. And if you use this small new type icon right here, you can create your first type. I'm going to keep the names here kind of generic and just simply call this one large. Now, for the actual values of these parameters, I'm going to use imperial units for both files, whether you're working in imperial or metric. The cut sheet that I'm working from is in inches. That's going to happen sometimes if you're trying to build a family based on manufacturer content. You won't get to decide what units they were working in. But watch this. In Revit, you can put in the unit and it will automatically do the conversion. So what I'm going to do is put in 88 inches. And regardless of which file you're working in, if you're working in imperial, when you enter that, it will format it as feet and inches. If you're working in metric, it will format it as the correct number of millimeters. So let's repeat that for the width, 44 inches. So make sure you're using that inch symbol, enter it, and it will do the conversion. Now we're going to click the apply button here and watch the reference planes in the background. They will adjust to match that new size. So now we're going to click the new button again. We're going to call this one small. And the small size is 78 inches long. Again, press enter to do the conversion. And it is 39 inches wide. Press enter to do the conversion and then click apply to see the change. So now here's the best part of creating family types. If you want to flex your family, and flex is just the word that we use to test things out. So you want to get in the habit of flexing often when you're working in the family editor. To flex, you simply choose the drop down here and pick a different size and click apply, and it will reapply those values in one step. So another way to think about family types is they are just a saved and named variation of your family. And now we can easily toggle between the two variations that we've created anytime that we need to here in this dialog.
In this video, we're going to begin creating the solid geometry required to begin sculpting our pool table family. So I'm going to start with a simple extrusion. And I think the easiest place to build it would be in the floor plan view. So I'm going to click here in the ref level tab, and you'll see it turn bold here on the ribbon tab, and it also turns bold here on the project browser. And that's how I can tell that that's the active view. Then I'm going to put my mouse kind of near the center and just roll in a few clicks in order to zoom in and get a closer look at the reference plane structure that we established in the earlier video. If you look at your ribbon, you will see a series of forms. Here's our extrusion right here. These all have these little animated tooltips. So I do encourage you to kind of watch those. It gives you a general sense of what kind of things you'll be prompted for to create these forms. But an extrusion is just a simple sketch-based object that you can create in any closed shape. I'm going to click on that, and that takes me to the sketch mode for this extrusion. And for this one, we're going to keep it pretty simple and just use a rectangle shape. So I'm going to click that right here, and you want to simply snap from two opposite corners on the reference planes that we have here in our plan view. So I'm going to click there, opposite corner across to here, and click. And that's going to display these four little padlock symbols. And what I'm going to do is simply close each of those padlocks. That's all I need to do for the sketch. So I will click the finish button right here to finish that edit mode and create the 3D form. Now in the 3D view, it's in wireframe, and I think it will look a little nicer if we shade it. So I'm going to use the little visual style pop-up here and change that to shading. And now it looks a little bit more solid. Now, you recall that in an earlier video, we set up some types in this family. So it's always a good idea to get in the habit of flexing as you make changes. So we have added our new piece of solid geometry. Let's go to family types right here. And you can position this window so that you can see a few of the views at the same time. And then I'm just going to toggle to my small size, click apply. That box will get a little bit smaller. Everything's working correctly. Let's go back to the large size and click OK. All right. So that's our piece of solid geometry. Now I want to direct our attention to the vertical dimensions of this piece of solid geometry. The first thing about it is that it's sitting on the floor and I need to move it up. And the second thing is that it's too thick. So let's address both of those issues now. So I'm going to work here in this front view and I'll just zoom in a little bit. Now there's a variety of ways that you could adjust the height and thickness of this solid form. I like to do it with reference planes. It's not the only way, but it's the way that I'm going to show you here. Okay, it's my preference. So I'm going to go to the Create tab and click the Reference Plane tool, or RP. And what I want to do is click and drag across the top there to create a horizontal reference plane that's parallel to the ground. When it says click to name, I'm going to click right on there and label this tabletop. And then for the dimension, I'm going to click right in there. And imperial, I want to do 2 foot 7 inches. If you're working in metric, you can put 787 millimeters, 787. Now keep that dimension active, and there's a little make this temporary dimension permanent icon right here. I'm going to click that. That creates a dimension for that reference plane. I'll go to the modify tool to cancel out of the command, grab that dimension, drag it off to the side. And at this point, you're probably thinking that we will go up here and label it with a new parameter. And we certainly could do that like we did in plan view, but honestly, it's not really necessary in this case. So I want to point out that it's not always required that you create a parameter for every dimension. You certainly can do that, but if the dimension is a fixed value that doesn't need to flex, then what you can do instead is simply lock it. So when I lock it, that creates a constraint, and that constraint will ensure that this reference plane always remains at 2 foot 7 or 787 above the ground. Okay, so that's a perfectly appropriate way to deal with that reference plane location. Now I'm going to select the reference plane and go to my copy tool next. Pick a start point anywhere on screen, pull it straight down. And if you're working in imperial, you want to move it down 3 inches. If you're working in metric, you want to go down 76 millimeters. Cancel out of the command, come back and add a dimension between these two reference planes, pull it off to the side and lock it. And then finally come back and select that reference plane, click on its label and give it a name, and I'll call it underside. So we now have these two reference planes that we're going to use to relocate and change the thickness of our box. Now, I want to point out that on my screen, the label underside is below my reference plane. That's because when I drew the original reference plane, I started at the left and drew to the right. If you went the other way, from right to left, notice that the label would be above the reference plane. That actually matters. Okay. So the reference plane has a positive and a negative direction. The label is on the negative side. So that means that anything created on this reference plane or this reference plane will extrude up. Anything created on this reference plane will extrude down. So if your labels are facing up, then what you want to do is use the little grip control here on the edge, drag that past itself, and notice that that flips the label, and then you can take the other endpoint and pull it back the other way. Now, mine was correct originally, so I'm just going to stretch it back again. But it is possible to reverse the direction of that reference plane, but you just want to make note of that before you continue. Okay, so now all we need to do is select this box and move it to that reference plane. Now, you might be thinking we're just going to use these little grips to do that, and you certainly could, but that's not my preferred way to do it. What I would rather do is leverage the Edit Work Plane tool right here. Now, if you click this choice, it will take you to a dialog where you can choose by name from the list. That's perfectly fine to do it that way. This is a little bit more convenient. Pick a plane, and there's a keyboard shortcut of PK. So all I need to do is click the underside reference plane and the box will jump up to that location. And once again, if yours jumps up there and points down, then your reference plane is reversed. You'll need to go back and make some adjustments. Now, you could take this grip and stretch it down to here, but I prefer to use the align tool for this. Again, just different ways of doing the same thing. So I'm going to go to the align tool, pick the reference plane as my alignment edge, then the top of the box, and then I'm going to lock that to ensure that it stays attached. So that completes our first piece of solid geometry. In the next video, we will use a sweep solid form to create the bumper rail around our pool table.
In this video, we're going to continue creating solid geometry to represent our pool table, and we're going to move on to a sweep, and that's going to form the shape of the bumper rail that goes around the playing surface. Now, a sweep is a solid form that follows a path. So if you hover over any of these solid form tools and let the tooltip load, you'll see a small animation, and that animation will kind of show you the way that tool functions. So in the case of the sweep, you can see they're creating a path and then they're taking some shape and moving it along that path. And that's what we're going to be doing to create this bumper rail geometry that goes around our pool table. Now I'm going to work in the ref level floor plan. I'm going to zoom in nice and close. And then I want to make sure that the geometry I'm building references the reference planes and not the extrusion. The easiest way to ensure that is to temporarily hide the extrusion to get it out of our way. So I'm going to select it, go down to the sunglasses, choose hide element. Notice that puts me in temporary hide isolate mode just in the floor plan view. And now I can build my sweep relative to the reference planes without accidentally snapping to the geometry. In general, it's always preferable to reference planes or levels rather than other geometry. You usually get better results that way. Okay, so now I'm going to click over here to the Create tab, and I want to ensure that the sweep that I'm going to create goes to the correct work plane. So in the previous video, we used the edit work plane. Here I'm going to do set work plane. So you can create the object first and then later change its work plane, or you can set the work plane ahead of time and draw it directly. That's what we're going to do here. So we used pick a plane in the previous example. This time I'm going to click set work plane. That displays this dialog. And then here there's a name list and all of your named reference planes are listed here. So I want to draw my sweep at the height of the playing surface. So I'm going to choose reference plane playing surface as the choice there, click OK. And now I will be drawing this sketch up at that height. So next I'm going to go to the sweep tool, and when you get into the sweep, you have two options available right here. You can sketch the path or you can pick the path. So we're going to choose sketch the path, and this is going to allow us to draw the shape that we want our sweep to follow. So I'm going to start with a simple rectangle, and then I don't want to snap it right to the reference planes. What I want to do instead is offset it away from those reference planes by a little bit. So I'm going to put in 3 inches in imperial or 75 millimeters in metric. Then when I snap to one of these intersections, you'll see that the sketch that's being created is offset away from that by whatever value you typed in. Now you can tap the space bar and it will offset in the opposite direction. So just make sure that it is drawing the shape outside of the rectangle defined by the reference planes, and then click the opposite corner. So now what I want to do is blunt off all the corners. So I'm going to do that by switching to the line tool, and I'll just zoom in here in the upper left-hand corner and snap right to the intersection of the reference plane and the sketch line. But notice that it still has that offset applied to it. So before you click the second point, come up here to the options bar and just zero out the offset, and then you should be able to draw the second point like so. Switch to trim and extend a corner and trim that up. And then just simply repeat that on the other 4 corners. And when you're done, your path should look something like this. Now, notice this little red dot that appears on one of the edges. That dot has a little green dashed plane superimposed on it. Now, the easiest way to see it is in one of your elevation views. So the right elevation, in my case, is showing me that green dashed box as a plane that I'm looking directly at. That is the sketch plane for the profile that we're going to push along this path. So when you click finish here, you want to be looking at this view, okay, the right view. So I'm going to make that the active view. And then this is where we're going to finish the sweep. Now you have two options with the profile that you're using for the sweep. You could choose the edit profile button here, and that would put you in sketch mode, and you could just simply draw the shape, or it's possible to use a family to determine that shape. So I've created a profile family for this purpose to speed things up, and we're simply going to load that in here. A profile family is nothing but a 2D shape that you've drawn in the family editor that you can then reuse in more than one family. So I'm going to click load profile, and then I'll go to my desktop, my exercise files folder, and then finally chapter 14. And I'm going to select this rail family here, and you can kind of see the shape there in the preview on the right-hand side. And let's click open. And that loads that profile into this family file. And now I can simply select it by name from this drop-down list. So I'll choose rail, and you're going to see it appear right there on that little red dot. Now, it turns out that this profile can be moved around. So you can move it in any direction that you like. I'm going to do Control Z to put it back where it started from, but I'm going to move it a little bit more systematically using the Align tool. So I'm going to go to Align, pick this reference plane right here, and then the reference plane on the rail itself. And you'll see that we'll snug it over to the edge of the pool table geometry. And then I will click Finish, and the result of our sweep can be seen best in the 3D here. As we've done in several other examples, you should probably flex at this point just to make sure everything is working correctly. So there's the smaller size, here's the larger size, and that is working just fine. So in the next video, we'll keep going and add the pockets to the pool table. In this video, we're going to continue with the geometry required for our pool table, and we're going to move on to void forms. So solid forms are what we've created so far. They create actual physical objects. If you want to cut away from those objects, you can use a void form. So sometimes the way to create a more complex form is to create a solid first and then carve from that solid various voids to create the more complex shape. So that's what we're going to look at here, and we're going to use the void to create the pockets that cut into the surface of the pool table. Now, we could go directly to the void forms dropdown here, and notice that you get the same 5 shapes that are available as solid forms. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it that way. I sometimes like to create it as a solid first to get the geometry correct first. And then once I'm satisfied with the geometry, then you can convert it to a void and apply it to your solid. And that's the workflow that I'm going to show you here. So it's just a matter of preference. It's not that one is more correct than the other. It's just 2 different ways of doing the same thing. So I'm going to work in the ref level floor plan initially, and I'm going to select the sweep, the bumper rail geometry, go to the temporary hide isolate, hide that element. Then I'm going to select the surface and hide that element as well. So I like to do that just because I like to be able to see the reference planes very clearly and make sure that I'm drawing my geometry relative to them. Next, I will go to the create panel, choose extrusion, and then I'm going to switch to a circle, and I'm going to draw a small circle right here at a 2-inch radius in imperial or 50 millimeters in metric. If you're getting a warning that says the element is too small, just zoom in and try again. And you should be able to, at a closer zoom, make a 2-inch or 50 millimeter circle. So we want 2 of them, one that is snapped to the center and the edge, and the other one that is snapped to the corner. I'm going to take this one that we snapped to the corner and go to my move tool, pick a start point, start moving to the right, and I want to move it 1 1/4 inches in imperial or 32 millimeters in metric. Then I'm going to select both circles and move them down the same amount. So 1 1/4 inches imperial or 32 millimeters metric. Once I've done that, I'll take just the one at the corner, mirror that to the other side. Then I will deselect, come back and select all 3, and mirror those to the other side like so. So you should now have a total of 6 circles, and they're all offset the same amount all the way around. I want to change the work plane for this geometry that I'm drawing. In the previous video, we set the work plane to the playing surface, and I want to sync it down to the underside. So what I'm going to do here is choose Set Work Plane, and instead of playing surface, I'll choose underside, click OK, and now when I click Finish, it should draw those cylinders, 6 of them, starting at the reference plane right here, and you can kind of see that very clearly in one of your elevation views. All right, so notice that here in 3D, if we kind of click away from it, that it's currently solid geometry. Well, I said that I wanted to get the shape correct first, and then when I was satisfied with it, I would convert it to a void. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to select this object. Now notice that all 6 cylinders are part of the same extrusion, so you just need to click one and it will highlight all 6. Then we're going to come over here to the properties palette, scroll down, and there's a solid void parameter, and it's currently solid. You can simply change that to a void. Now, the reason I wanted to do it this way, other than that I like to do it that way to get the geometry correct first, is also I wanted to show you what a non-engaged void looks like. So notice that when you just have a freestanding void in your model, it will show up in this yellow transparent glass material. And that's how you can tell that that's a non-engaged void. So to engage that void with solids and to begin having it cut away from the solids, you use the cut tool. So I'm going to come up here to cut geometry, click that, select the element that you want to cut, the sweep, and then click the object you want to do the cutting with, the void, and notice that it will carve that shape out of the bumper material. I'm going to zoom in nice and close near one of the pockets. Notice I'm still in the cut tool. So you can pick a second object like the extrusion and then move near the edge where the void should be, and it's still there, and you can select the same void and have it cut more than one element. So now notice that we've used that one void to cut both pieces of geometry. And that completes our pockets for this pool table. So in the next video, we will give our pool table some legs so that it's not suspending, free floating in space here.
So there's just a little bit more geometry that we need to complete the form of our pool table. We need some legs, and in this video, we're going to build them using a blend. Now, I'm going to start here in the floor plan, ref level floor plan, and zoom in just a touch so that we can get a better look. And as we've done with other forms, I want to start with reference planes. So make sure you're using reference plane, not reference line. Keyboard shortcut is RP. And what I want to do is create 2 reference planes running vertically kind of inside the pool table here. Now, you'll notice that I'm creating them longer than the pool table, but shorter than the other reference planes. That's intentional. And I'm going to do the same thing for one running horizontally this way. So I'm creating it at a different length than the existing reference planes, but I'm making sure that it passes through the full length of the pool table. Now, the reason I like to do it that way, let's click the modify tool here to cancel out, is because it makes it much easier to dimension, and also visually it starts to establish a hierarchy. So I can tell visually that these 2 are related to one another because they're the same length, but they're different than these other ones. And then when I go to dimension, it's much easier to select them to place dimensions because it's really important that you're dimensioning the reference planes and not directly to the solid geometry. So I'm going to create a dimension right there. Then I'm going to do the left edge to this one, and then the 2 reference planes to each other right there. Okay, so you can see that it was very easy for me to place those dimensions without accidentally dimensioning directly to the solid geometry. That's why I did it that way. So I'm going to select this reference plane, edit the dimension, and if you're working in imperial, I want that to be 3 inches. If you're working in metric, it should be 75 millimeters. Then I'm going to repeat that with this reference plane next and edit the value to the one next to it to 1 foot imperial or 300 in metric. And you want to make sure that you select that dimension and lock it. And in fact, you want to lock this one as well. So finally, we're going to select this one and modify this value, and this should be 6 inches in imperial or 150 in metric, and then we will lock that. And now we have all of those reference planes positioned where they need to go. Let's select the horizontal one and its dimension, go to mirror pick axis. We're going to pick the center line of the pool table right there. And if everything works correctly, it should mirror the dimension and lock it on the top half. Now, if it didn't do that for some reason, just simply add the dimension and lock it manually. So now we want to test all of that by just going to family types, choosing our small size, click apply. And because we locked all those dimensions, all those margins around the space for the leg should be maintained as it changes size. So that looks pretty good. I'll go back to the large size, and now we're ready to begin creating our solid form. Now that's going to be a blend. So we're going to go to create. Here's the blend tool. Now you can think of a blend as simply an extrusion with 2 sketches. So if you watch the little animation here, you can see that it's blending between the first sketch and the second one. So I will click the blend tool, and then over here on the ribbon, you have the same draw shapes that we've had for some of the other tools that we've looked at. I'm going to start with a simple rectangle. And then I'm going to come over here to the options bar and apply an offset. So if you're working in imperial, that's going to be 2 inches. If you're working in metric, it's going to be 50 millimeters. And then what I want to do is click one of the intersections of the reference planes we just drew and go to the opposite corner. But notice that the rectangle is going outside of the reference planes. Before you click the opposite corner, tap the space bar to flip it to the inside, and then click. And that will create that inner rectangle. Now you go to edit top, and that will put you in the same sketch mode, but now you're drawing the top sketch. And we're going to stick with a rectangle, remove the offset, so set that back to 0. And this time we're going to use a radius. And let's use the same value, 2 inches imperial or 50 millimeters metric. And then when you snap to the opposite corners this time, that will round off the corners of the sketch. Now go ahead and close all these padlocks, and then you can click finish to complete the blend. Now we've got a couple issues here. The first is that the blend created up at the surface of the table. That's not really where we wanted it. And the second is, if I look at it maybe here in the front elevation, it's too short. Okay. Now the depth is actually controlled by this value right here on the ribbon, and it is possible for you to type that value in if you know what it is. We don't really need to do that though. We don't need to calculate what it is. We can do it another way instead, interactively on screen. But first, let's get it down to the correct location. So I'm going to select this blend, go to the drop down here, pick a work plane, and I'm going to pick the ref level to bring it down to the floor. Once we've done that, I will go to the Align tool, or AL, select that, and I'm going to pick the underside reference plane as what I want to align to, and then the top of the blend, and then lock that. Now, the reason I'm using the Align and the reason I'm using the reference plane is it's really important that you always establish your relationships between references and not directly on the geometry. Okay, it's just a standard best practice to do there. So finally, we're going to click back here in the plan view, select the blend, select both of these vertical reference planes. So I'm using my control key to get that, the dimension here and the dimension here. So if you look over here on the properties palette, it should say common 5. You've got 5 elements selected. That's 2 dimensions, 2 reference planes, and 1 blend. Go to mirror, pick axis, pick the center line. That should mirror everything around to the other side. Now, it looks like it wasn't happy with the 6-inch dimension. Not a big deal. You can simply create a new dimension. Just make sure to lock it. So once you've done that, it's a good idea to flex. So we can do this in whatever view is convenient. We'll go to our small size. We'll click apply. Everything should be adjusting as expected. And if it is, you can go back to large and click OK. And so we're just about done now with our pool table. That's the major geometry that we need. There's still a few finishing touches, but we will save those for the next video.
In this video, there's a few finishing touches I would like to apply to this pool table. One is I would like to add a material to the playing surface to get that really recognizable green felt. And then I also want to add some accessories to the pool table. So let's start with the material. We're going to get there on the Manage tab. And what we need to do is go to the Materials dialog and create a material first. Now, in the Materials dialog, it's possible to search and look for a suitable material, but the chances that there is a green felt material here already is pretty slim. So what we're simply going to do is come down here to the new icon and we're going to create a new material. We can right click that new material and we can rename it. And I'll just call it green felt. And then it has two sets of properties over here that we want to consider, graphics and appearance. Let's jump over to appearance. Now, on the Appearance tab, you can expand the information, and the name of the appearance information is separate from the name of the material. Now, it doesn't have to be, so I think it'll be less confusing if we change generic 1 to green felt as well. But it won't do that automatically. So if you want the names to match, you need to do that yourself. Now, let me just make this a little larger, just so we can see the properties here a little bit better. There are a number of properties here, but honestly, all we really care about is the color. So right here, it's using a medium gray. All we need to do is click that, and you can choose one of the built-in greens right here, or you can pick something off the color wheel, or you could drag the slider, but I think that green looks fine, so I'm just going to accept that. And that's really all we need to do for this example is apply a green color. Now, back to the Graphics tab, I mentioned there was two tabs. Appearance is used whenever you display textures. So that'll be used in realistic shading or textures shading. Graphics is used in other views. So hidden line, shaded, consistent colors, and so on. If we leave it the way it is right now, when we go to shading, it'll still be gray and you'll be confused. Wait a minute, I thought I assigned the color to green. Why isn't it green? So the easiest solution is to just check this little box right here, and that synchronizes those two colors. So now the render appearance color that's used in rendering is going to also apply to shading. So that's it. That's all we want to do for this material. Let's click OK. And now we need to apply that material to the playing surface. So select the extrusion and then look at the properties palette. So we're going to scroll down here. And there's a material property right here. And you could assign this material to the playing surface in one of two ways. If you click right where it says by category, a small browse button appears. You could click that and you're right back in the material editor. You could select it, click OK. I'm going to actually cancel that because I don't want to assign it that way. What I want to do instead is use this small icon right next to the by category that says associate family parameter. This is going to make it more flexible, but it's going to take a few extra steps. Here in this dialog, we don't have any material parameters just yet. So down at the bottom, there's a new parameter icon, and we can create one. And if this looks similar to what we did earlier with dimensions, then you are correct, because this is just a different kind of parameter. So instead of this being a length dimension, like we did for width and length, this is a material parameter. So I'm going to give this a name, maybe playing surface. And that's just the name of the material that we're assigning to this surface. Let's click OK. OK again. Notice that this grays out now. You can't change it. And there's an equal sign on the Associate Family Parameter button indicating that this value is being driven by a parameter. But here's where, if this is the first time you're doing this and you click away to deselect it, you might start getting frustrated because you're saying to yourself now, where's the green felt? Why didn't it change? Well, think of what we just created as more of a material placeholder. So we've just made it possible to assign a material to the surface. And more importantly, we've made it a parameter so it's flexible. So let me show you what I mean. Let's go back to family types. And notice that playing surface is now one of my parameters. And the reason it's still gray is because here it's still set to by category. This is where we're going to browse to the material window, choose our green felt, and click OK. And now finally, if you click apply, it will apply that to the surface of the pool table. However, I want to point out one last thing here. switch to the small size and click apply, and notice that it goes back to being gray. And that's because the way we set it up, each type can have its own material designation. So let's say you wanted to create red felt or brown felt. You could go back to the material browser, create other colors, and then you could have different types that were assigned to different colors. That's the reason to do it this way. In our example, though, I'm going to keep it simple and just assign them both to the green felt. But if you want to explore materials more on your own later, feel free to add some additional materials and try that out. So I want to reset back to the large size. So I'll click OK there. And then as a final finishing touch, I want to add some accessories to the pool table. Now, I've already created a family for that purpose to save us some time. But remember the table and chairs example from an earlier video? You can have a parent family like the table that has other families nested in, like the chairs. Well, in this case, we've got a parent family, the pool table, and we're going to have the accessories nested in as a subfamily. So we're going to go to Create here, click the Component button. It will tell us that we don't have any component families loaded and ask us if we would like to load one. Let's answer yes. And then in the dialog that appears in the exercise files folder, I have created a family called Cues and Balls. Select that, click Open. That loads that family in and places it on my cursor for placement. Now, notice it says click to place an instance on a face. So this is what we call a face-based family. And the easiest way to demonstrate this is to show you some examples. You could place it on any surface on this family, including even the curved surface here on the legs. Now, I don't think those make sense, but certainly the tabletop surface does. So I'm going to start highlighting that surface. It's pointing the wrong way, space bar to rotate it 90 degrees, and then I'll just click somewhere to place it. Click the Modify tool to finish, and I think that really is a nice final touch there. So at this point, our pool table is complete, and the final test is to load it into a project and make sure that everything works as expected. So I just happen to have our condominium building loaded here in the background. So what you can do is, using the buttons on the Family Editor panel here, you can either load it into the project and leave the family open, or you can load it into the project and close the family file. So we're done working on this family, so I'm going to load it into the project and close. It'll ask if I want to save it. I'll answer yes. That closes all of those windows and takes me to the one open window of our condominium building here. And I'm going to zoom in close on the right-hand side and place an instance of it here in this rec room. And then I'll click the Modify tool to cancel. So now if you come back and select it, you can see that both of your sizes loaded in, large and small, and you can try each one and settle on the one that you like. And then if you really want to see this pool table in action, then what I recommend that you do is come over here to the 3D dropdown, choose camera. I'm going to stand over here in the common room and drag a camera towards the pool table like so. That is going to look directly at the pool table. You can adjust this view if necessary. And then let's turn on shading so that we can see our green felt. And at this point, we can confirm that everything is behaving the way that we expected. And so I always recommend that the final step is to load it into a project to test it out. But that completes our pool table family. And now you should have a pretty good idea of what the overall process is of creating a fully parametric piece of family content. When it comes time to start building your document set, you'll want to set up some sheets and you'll want to place some views on those sheets. And of course, you're going to want to be able to coordinate those views on the various sheets so that your recipients can easily find views that are referenced in one sheet to where they're located in another. Common examples of this are elevations, sections, callouts, where you want to indicate where those views are referenced. So we've got some examples here in this floor plan. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer so you can see. So over here on the left, you can see section 1 on A301. That's a referenced view tag. Up here at the top, we have section 2 on A301. That's another example of a referenced view tag. And then over here at the right, I have 2 examples of non-referenced view tags here and here. So these 2 are not yet placed on sheets. And so it's really that easy to tell which ones are which. Now, another way that you can tell is to look at Project Browser. So if I scroll down here on the Project Browser, we've got these little indicators next to each view. The ones with the blue badge are on sheets already. The ones where the badge is not colored are not yet on sheets. So if we scroll down to the sections branch right here, sections building section, you can see that the longitudinal section and the transverse section are both colored in blue. Those are the 2 that I just indicated to you, detail 1 and 2 on sheet A301. So those badges, by the way, are optional. If you want, you can right-click and uncheck the show placement on sheet status icons, but I personally think it's much nicer to have those visible, so I suggest leaving those on, but it is your preference if you want to turn them off. Let me scroll down now on the browser and locate the Sheets branch here. And then both of these sections that we talked about are on A301. So here is sheet A301. And if you expand the plus sign next to that, notice you can see any views that are placed on that sheet indented beneath. So here's our longitudinal section, and here's our transverse section. And then, of course, you can just double-click sheet A301 to open it up and have a look at it that way. Not only do those cross-references appear in the floor plan, but if you zoom in here on the section, notice that these 2 views reference each other. So in the longitudinal section, we've got a reference to the transverse right there, 2 on A301. And then likewise, in the transverse section, we've got another reference back to the longitudinal because these 2 sections cross one another. So all of that is happening automatically for us simply by creating these views. Revit takes care of all of this. Now, I appear to have plenty of room on this sheet, so let's see what happens when we add a new view. So I'm going to scroll up to the sections branch, and let's take the section at stair, start dragging that out of browser, and you'll see a little plus sign here, let go, and now you're going to see a rectangle representing the size of that view, and you can click to place this anywhere that you want on the sheet. Now, if you move nearby another title bar, the title bars will try to line up with one another. But what I think is better than that is if you move nearby a similarly cut view, like another section, it will try to line up the model geometry instead. So I think that's nicer in this case. So I'm going to line up with the model geometry and click. And then if we zoom in and you compare the heights of the levels, you can see that all the levels align with one another across the view. Now notice that this view got assigned to number 3 because that was the next available number on this sheet. And any other view that references this detail now will show that reference, including the transverse section right here. You can see that it's already filled in as detail number 3 on A301. If I go back to the floor plan, you can see that it's now referenced right there as well. That all takes care of itself. You don't have to do anything more than simply placing the view on the sheet and let Revit handle the work of keeping all the cross-references intact. So I'm going to click back to this sheet and let's talk about the numbering now. So this is detail 1, then 2, then 3. What if I wanted it to go 1, then 2, then 3? I can easily renumber the views by simply selecting it and then looking over at the properties palette. The detail number will be listed right here. Now, you could put in any other number you want, but you can't reuse an existing number. So if I try to use number 2, it says that number's already in use. So the workaround is a little silly, but take this one, change it temporarily to something that's not being used, like number 4. That frees up number 2. I come back and select it here and make that one number 2 now without warning. And then I can take this one and change it to 3. And now I've renumbered all of those to my desired order, and all of the references will take care of themselves. So now notice the section is number 2 here, and it's number 2 here as well. And the transverse is now number 3. So you can make those changes with full confidence without worrying that it's going to be missed somewhere like it would back in the days when we had to do these things by hand. Okay. So I really can't say enough about cross-referencing in Revit. It just works. It's easy, and it will guarantee that you have a fully coordinated set with very little effort. As we start talking about our sheet set and sheet composition, of course, one of the first questions you might have is, how do I create a sheet? Well, this file that we started with was based on the default template, and the default template includes many sheets for us to get started with, and many of those sheets even already have views inserted on them. So that's a big help, and that will certainly help you get started, but the chances that every sheet that you need and all the views on those sheets will already be set up in a template is pretty slim, so you're definitely going to need to create some sheets of your own and adjust the setup of those sheets for sure. So one of the easiest ways we could do that is to simply right-click the Sheets branch and choose New Sheet. Now, there's also a button for it on the View tab if you prefer. In the Imperial file, I'm going to select the E1 title block in this dialog that appears. In the Metric file, it's A0, but there's also a cover, so make sure you're choosing the A0, not the cover, the one that's the standard title block. Now, if you don't see the title block you want, there is a load button, so you could browse out and load a title block family. Click OK, and that's really all there is to it. That will create a new empty sheet ready for you to populate with views. Now, I'm going to scroll down a little on the browser here, and the name may be a little puzzling, like why did it do C102? Well, just remember the way that Revit numbers anything that it auto numbers. It simply remembers where it left off and picks up from there the next time you run the command. So in this case, the last sheet that was created in this project was C101, and so it just picked up from there and gave us C102. Well, you can rename or renumber the sheet in one of two ways. Right-click it and go to Rename, and that will display this dialog. You can put in a different number, so I'm going to put in A107 there, and for now, I'm just going to do a temporary name, like New Sheet. We're going to change that in just a moment. Notice that it disappears from here, and that's because I changed it to an A1 series, and so it will jump up in the list to the appropriate location based on the number. So by default, your sheet list is going to sort in alphanumeric order. Now, the other way that you could rename or renumber the sheet is directly on the title block. So if you select the title block and then click right on one of the labels, that will activate it, and we can change the name from New Sheet, which was just a placeholder, to something more appropriate like Furniture Plans. Now, the number I put in wrong as well. I put in 107, but I meant to put in 701. So I'm going to type A701. And as soon as I enter that, watch the project browser. It will leave that spot. And then if we scroll down, it now occurs after A601. So again, it's going to resort based on the values you put in. And notice, of course, that it now says Furniture Plans here as well. So feel free to edit the name and number using either method. It doesn't make a difference because they're both doing the same thing. Now, Furniture Plans is unique to this sheet, as is 701. The author field is unique to this sheet. So I can put in my initials. I can put in the initials of whoever's going to check this. Those are all sheet-specific values. If I go to some other sheet, notice that the author and checker are unchanged here. However, if I go back to the Furniture Plans here, if I were to change Office Park or Headquarters or the project number or the project date, any of those values are global and would affect all the sheets. So if we change the date from 515 to 520 and enter that, then we come over here, it's set to 520 in this window as well. Now, the other place where we can do this, we've already seen earlier in the course. If I go back to Manage and Project Information, you may recall that this is the dialog we use to fill in this information in the first place. And so there's the date right there, and I could change it again. So let's change it to June 20, and you could change any of the other values if you wish. And when I click OK, the date changes here, and it changes here. And in fact, if you open up any of the other sheets, you'll see it change in those locations as well. All right, so I'm going to click back to the Furniture Plans and zoom out. And all that really remains now is to take this empty sheet and put a view on it. And that's as simple as drag and drop. Now, on the project browser, you can tell when a sheet is empty because there will be no plus or minus sign next to its name. So this sheet has views on it. This one, and this one do not. Okay, so let's scroll up here on the project browser. Let's locate our level 1 architectural furniture plan, drag it, drop it, and place it somewhere on the sheet. And that's really all there is to it. So if you need to add a sheet to your set, it's a very simple process to do. And then you just drag and drop views to populate that sheet. Sometimes you will want to revisit the composition of a sheet and make adjustments. So in this video, I'm thinking about this furniture plan that we set up, and I'm thinking there's an awful lot of extra unused white space around the plan, and I'd like to try and fit both the first and second floor furniture plans on the same sheet. So to do that, I'm going to need to adjust the size of this viewport so that it's cropped closer to the building geometry for both of the furniture plans, and then I should be able to fit them here together. Let's go ahead and look at that process. I'm going to do this work directly in the sheet here, and what you can do is actually double click right inside this viewport to activate that view while the sheet is still visible. So that can sometimes be a handy way to work so that you can kind of use the sheet as reference. Now, we've got this crop region out here, and you may recall that that crop region is being controlled by a scope box. So if I scroll down to the extents area, the scope box right here is currently assigned to views overall. You have two ways that you can adjust the cropping of this view. You can either set this to none, which exposes the little grip controls here, and then you can simply begin adjusting this manually. That would be fine if you only had 1 or 2 views to do. But if you have lots of views to do and you want them to be coordinated, it might be nicer to create another scope box. So that's the method that I'm going to do instead. And to do that, I'm going to come over here to the View tab, and the scope box tool is right here. Now, to draw a scope box, it's as simple as clicking the tool and then just dragging out a rectangle. So I'm going to start right about here and then drag out a rectangle that's a nice close crop to the shape of the building. With that scope box selected, I can come over here to the properties and change its name. So it defaults to Scope Box 3, but I would rather it be called Furniture and Power Plans. And that's because I'm going to use that scope box for both the furniture and the power plans, so I'm naming it accordingly. So now I'm going to deselect the scope box. That gets me back to the properties of the furniture plan. I'll scroll back down to the extents area, and now we'll take the scope box, which is currently set to none, and we'll change that to our newly created furniture and power plans, and you'll now see it come in and crop closely around the building. Now, this next step is very important. You might be tempted to just come over here and grab this and drag it, but that would actually change the cropping of the view. You don't want to do that. You're still in an active viewport. You need to double click outside of that view to deactivate the viewport. Notice that the sheet comes back to full intensity. That's how you know that it's safe to drag this now. Now you can grab this viewport and drag it and place it where you want it to go. And you can use the arrows on your keyboard to fine tune the position. So I'm snugging that up in the upper left-hand corner. That looks pretty good. Now, notice that the title bar went along for the ride. In addition, there's a little grip control here, and you can drag that title bar to make it a little bit shorter. But if you want to move that title bar independently of the viewport, you need to first deselect, then click right on the title bar and drag it, and notice that you can move it separately from its viewport. So it's pretty important that you understand that, because otherwise you'll try and drag the title bar and it'll move the viewport too. Okay? All right. So now I've got the first floor set up. The second floor furniture plan is here on the project browser, and I don't even need to open it to do the next step. I can simply select it right here on the browser. That gives me access to its properties at the top here. I will scroll down and locate its scope box feature. It's currently set to views overall. That's the large one. I'm going to just simply change that to furniture and power plans, and that's all I need to do. Now I can drag and drop this into the view window, and you can see it's using the smaller sized scope box. Now, remember that if you kind of move around here, it will try to sense where the building geometry is, and it's going to line this up perfectly. So make sure that you're lining it up with the first floor and then click. And now you can see that the second floor has come in here and it's lined up perfectly with the first floor. I will click away from it to deselect. I'll grab the title bar independently, drag it to this location, and notice that it senses where the other title bar is. I'll let go. Then I'll come back and click the viewport to get to this grip again and drag it until it senses where the other one is and let go. And now that completes our setup. Now, I am going to do one last thing here. Notice that these views are showing that red dashed section. So we talked about that in an earlier video, but I'm going to remind you of where that is right here. Now, both of these furniture plans are using a view template to control their visibility. So I'm going to go to the view templates dropdown, choose manage view templates, scroll down and locate the furniture plan view template, and then edit the filters. Now, you may recall from an earlier video that views working is controlling that visibility of those temporary sections, and I can simply hide them by unchecking visibility, click OK a few times, and that completes the setup of our furniture plan sheet, now with its much closer cropping. Going through all the steps to manually set up a sheet and configure its views can be time consuming. So in this video, I want to show you a couple techniques where you can use the duplicate sheet functionality to speed that process up. So in the first scenario, I want to create a new sheet for the power plans, and I want to configure them exactly the way that the furniture plans are configured with both floors on the same sheet. So let's look at that example first, and then we'll move on to a second example where we will create a new second floor plan sheet. So I'm going to scroll down here on the project browser and locate the A701 furniture plans sheet. And what you do is you just simply right click it, and there's a duplicate sheet option right here. Now, there's a few choices here, but honestly, the one that I want to show you is duplicate with views. That's the one that's really powerful. Duplicate empty sheet is not much different than creating a new sheet. And duplicate with sheet detailing only applies if you actually have detailing on your sheet, like general notes or something like that. So I'm going to choose duplicate with views. And then it will offer me this dialog to give me 3 ways to duplicate the nested views. So it recognizes that there are 2 viewports on this sheet, and it's going to duplicate both of those as well. Now, since there are room labels in the floor plans, and I think it might be nice to have those room labels on the power plans too, I'm going to choose the second option to duplicate with detailing. That creates a new sheet over here with the suffix copy1 and 2 nested views that also have copy1 at the ends of their names. So I'm going to right click the A702 furniture plans copy1 and choose rename. That puts me in this dialog. I'm going to change the number to 801 and remove copy1 from the name and instead put in power plans. So that renames the sheet, but now what about these nested views? Well, at the moment, these nested views are exact copies of the furniture plans. So what I'm going to do is perhaps a little bit surprising, but I'm going to scroll up to the top of the list here, back to my floor plans, and I'm going to take my original power plans and delete them. Now, at first you may be thinking, that's surprising. Why would you do that? Well, you can only get away with this technique if your power plans or whatever view you're deleting doesn't have a lot of view-specific elements to it that you want to preserve. So in this case, the only real difference between the power plans and the furniture plans are the view template that was assigned to them. So I can easily recreate this power plan by just reusing that existing power plan view template. So what I'm going to do is select L1 architectural power and hold the control key down, and L2 architectural power, press the delete key, and that removes both of those views. Now I'm going to come back to the same location here where we see L1 architectural furniture copy 1, and I'm going to right click that and choose rename. And I'm going to press the N key to go to the end of the name and backspace out all of this and change it to power. And then I'll repeat that for this one, rename, go to the end, backspace out all of this and change it to power. So going back down to the bottom of the window here now, you can see that we have power plan and power plan inserted on this A801 sheet. However, they still look like furniture plans to me. Well, now all we need to do is select the L1 power plan, hold the control key, and the L2 power plan. Come up here to the properties. It says views 2, so we've got them both selected. We're going to scroll down to the view template option. It's currently assigned to the furniture plan. We're going to click that button and assign it to the typical power plan instead. Click OK, and that's all there is to it. Now, both of those views look like power plans instead of furniture plans. Now, as I said, if you had a bunch of view-specific detailing on those power plans, that technique would not work, okay? Because when we delete the views, we would lose all that detailing. So let's look at a second scenario that has to do with the floor plans, the main architectural floor plans. Here's our L1 architectural floor plan. It's got lots of tags and dimensions. Here's our L2 architectural floor plan. It also has lots of tags and dimensions, but they're different than the ones on L1. So that technique wouldn't work here if we wanted to create an L2 sheet from an L1 sheet. So we're going to approach it a little bit differently in this case. So I'm going to close both of these views. And then I'm going to scroll down, and on the project browser under Sheets, you may notice that I've removed the A102 sheet from the sheet set. We're going to recreate it now from the A101 sheet. So right-click A101, go to Duplicate Sheet, and you want to choose Duplicate with Views again. Same command we just did a moment ago. It doesn't matter what you choose this time, because the view that we're going to create is just going to be a placeholder, and we're going to get rid of it when we're done. I'm just going to choose duplicate. This is a copy of level 1 without any detailing right now. Now I'm going to right-click A102 and choose rename. I'm going to remove copy 1 from the name and accept architectural floor plans, and the number A102 is fine. So now here's what we're going to do differently. Rather than try to make this copied floor plan look like level 2, I'm going to swap out this viewport with my existing level 2 floor plan that's already part of my project. And the way that we do that is to simply select the viewport, and then up here on the ribbon, we can choose a different view to put in its place. Now, you can do that either from the viewport center or the viewport origin. In my experience, viewport origin tends to work better for floor plans, so I'm going to choose that. Then I'm going to open up this list, choose the floor plan L2 architectural, and that is all there is to it. Now this sheet, this newly duplicated sheet, is using our existing L2 floor plan as is with all its detailing intact, and it's just matching the configuration of the existing L1 sheet that it was based on. So those two sheets are the same configuration as one another, and I was just able to do that a lot more quickly. So as you're building out a robust sheet set, especially on projects that have lots of floors, I think either one of those two techniques will greatly speed up the process of creating the various sheets that will be required in typical projects. In this video, I want to show you a neat feature that schedules have when you place them on sheets. There's an option called Filter by Sheet. And with this option, we can break up a large schedule into pieces that pertain to whatever is shown in the sheet that it's on. That may be a little confusing, so let me just demonstrate. I think that'll be easier. So what I'm going to do is I've got this first floor plan right here, A101 architectural floor plans. It has a single viewport for the first floor. Then I'm going to scroll down to the Sheets branch on my project browser, locate the second floor plan, double click to open that up, and this has a single viewport for the second floor. So my goal is I want to take the door schedule, which is currently on the A601 sheet. So let's double click that. And it's right here in the upper corner. So let me zoom in here. This door schedule is showing all the doors in the building, the ones on the first floor and the ones on the second floor. Now you can see that if you look over in the hardware column over here, notice that this batch of doors begins with number 1. Those are the ones on the first floor. And this batch begins with number 2. Those are the ones on the second floor. So our goal is to place this door schedule on the other 2 sheets, 101 and 102, and separate it out into 2 pieces that are grouped based on the levels that they pertain to. That allows us to take advantage of a unique feature of schedules. Schedules can appear on more than one sheet. Graphical views cannot. What I want to show you is that if we go back to one of our floor plans here, scroll up to the top of the list, take any other floor plan or view that has a little blue badge next to it, start to drag it and drop it on this A101 floor plan, it's going to tell you that that view is already placed on another view and that you can't place it again here, and it'll give you some options like duplicating and so on. I'm just going to close that because I don't actually want to go through with that. Schedules do not have that limitation. Schedules can be placed on multiple sheets at the same time. So that means we could leave the schedule here on the A601 sheet if we wanted to and place it on 101 and 102, but I don't think we need it here on 601 anymore. So I'm going to select it on 601, press the delete key. That does not delete the schedule. That just simply removes it from the sheet. So if we scroll down here on the project browser, what that does is the schedule is still here, but notice that the badge is not blue anymore. Okay. So before I deleted it, the badge was blue like the room schedule and the sheet list, but now it is white. Okay. So we've simply removed it from the sheet. So let's close A601. And now what I want to do is I've got 101 open here. I'm going to take this door schedule, drag and drop it, and I'm just going to kind of place it here beneath the floor plan on the 101 sheet. I mentioned that we can have it on more than one sheet at the same time. So I'm going to keep it selected. I'm going to copy it to my clipboard, click over here to the 102 sheet, paste, drop down, and align to current view. And I've just placed another copy in exactly the same spot. Okay, so I now have the same schedule on both sheets, but now I want to filter them by sheet. So that's the feature that we wanted to talk about here. So you want to do this next thing carefully. You can edit the door schedule by double-clicking on it, but you want to be careful that you don't double-click next to it. You know, if you're trying to get the schedule and then you accidentally do this, it's going to activate the floor plan because we placed this schedule on top of the floor plan. So if that happens, just double-click next to the floor plan to get out of there, and then try again by going right to the schedule and just try double-clicking it on the edge of some of the line work. And that usually works. And that's going to open up that schedule. Okay. So now with the schedule open, we can scroll down here on the properties palette, and next to filter, we're going to click this edit button. And all we need to do is check this box. Click OK. Nothing changes here in the door schedule itself. But if you close it and now look at the sheets, you can see very clearly here on our second floor sheet that it's much shorter. And notice over here in the hardware column that it's only showing us doors that are on the second floor. And then if we consider the first floor, we'll see the same thing, but the list is a little longer because there's more doors on the first floor. And that's it. That's the filter by sheet functionality. Now, this is a simple example because it's just a small 2-story building. But if you have a multi-story building, you can make use of this feature for any kind of schedule. It doesn't have to be a door schedule. So anytime you want to break up a schedule across multiple sheets based on the elements that are shown in the viewports, you can use that feature. In this video, I want to talk about the guide grid feature. Now, the guide grid feature is designed for one purpose. It allows you to line up viewports on one sheet with the similar viewports on another sheet. So a really common example of when you might want to use this is for floor plans where you have multiple floor plan sheets and you want the floor plans on each sheet to be in the same relative position relative to the title block, right? So the guide grid can help you do that. I've got this blank sheet here called Reflected Ceiling Plans, and the first thing I need to do is put some views on it. So I'm going to scroll down here to the ceiling plans branch, and it turns out you can actually drag and drop more than one view at the same time. So I'm going to use my control key and select both L1 and L2 ceiling plans, drag and drop, and then you'll see it places them kind of side by side, and you just simply click somewhere to place them. Now, it did its best to guess a good configuration. Naturally, I'm going to need to move these around because they don't fit the title block. But what I'd like them to do is to match other similar sheets that I have here in the set. So if I scroll down, you can open up either A701 furniture plans or 801 power plans. They're both set up the same way. And I'd like it to match this configuration. So we're going to create a guide grid from this sheet and then apply that to the reflected ceiling plan sheet. So to do that, we're going to go to the View tab. And on the sheet composition panel, there's a guide grid tool right here. Just simply click that and then give it a name. And I'll call this Plan Sheets. And I'll click OK. Now you get this really dense blue graph paper that appears covering the whole sheet. And it can be a little distracting at first, but we're going to adjust that in just a moment. Now, the way the guide grid works, the concept is you can snap your viewports to intersections of the grid. And specifically, you can snap datum elements in your viewports. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a measurement. Let's come over here to the Measure Between Two References tool, this little tape measure icon. And I'd like you to move your mouse around. Well, first of all, let's move around in the grid here. And notice that it will highlight any of the grid intersections on this dense blue graph paper. But also notice that it will sense where your grid lines are, where reference planes are, or where levels are. Now, we're looking at floor plans, so we don't see any levels. So in this case, we can snap to either grid intersections or reference plane intersections. So what I'd like to do is take the measurement from the intersection at A4 at the top of the plan down to the intersection at A4 at the lower version of this. So in this imperial file, the distance that I got was 1 foot 3 inches or 15 inches. In the metric file, that distance is 375 millimeters. So just jot that down somewhere. So now what I'm going to do is go to the Modify tool to cancel out of there, move my mouse over here to the guide grid, select it, and notice over here on the Properties palette, you can change the grid spacing. So instead of the default, which is this very dense blue grid, I'm going to increase that to the measurement that we just took. So here in Imperial, that's 15 inches. If you're working in metric, it's 375 millimeters. And when you apply that, your guide grid is now much bigger and certainly much less distracting. That's honestly all you really need to do, but I also like to take these grips here and resize it. I don't think I need it to be quite as large as it is, so I usually like to stretch that down. Now, you do need to be able to see at least one full square, so I'm going to stretch it down so that I can see just one square, and then I'm going to go to the Move command, and I'm just going to move it over here so we can see that better. That intersection right there, I want to line up with grid A4 over here, and this one will automatically line up here because we got the spacing correct. So let me show you. So we're going to snap right to there, and then notice that we can reach in there and snap right to the intersection here. And if you take a look here, notice that it perfectly lines up with A4 in both directions because we established that measurement. So we've now established our guide grid at the spacing and location that we want. Now, sometimes it's a little tricky to select here with the viewports on top of it. So I'm going to tab in, and if you like, you can stretch the width over just to make it easier so that it's selectable off to the side here. All we need to do now is go to our reflected ceiling plans sheet, scroll down on its properties, and at the very bottom is a guide grid property. Change that to plan sheets. And notice that that blue graph will now appear on this sheet as well in exactly the same location. So now you simply click on the first floor viewport, go to the Move tool, snap right to the intersection of grid A4 and snap that right to that intersection on the grid. If you're having any trouble getting it to snap to the intersection, you can type SI, which is the keyboard shortcut for snap to intersection. And notice I'm able to move both of those viewports to the appropriate locations. And then as a finishing touch, you can move and adjust the title bars. And of course, pay attention to the alignments so that they line up with one another. And that completes the setup of our ceiling plan sheet. You don't need to hide the guide grid, but you can if you want to. It won't print, but if you want to, you can set it to none and it will disappear if you no longer want to see it. In this video, we're going to talk about two special kinds of schedules, a sheet list and a view list. Now, if you think all the way back to the earliest part of the course where we created a new project from the built-in template, that built-in template contained a cover sheet, which I'm looking at now, and it also contained a sheet list schedule. Now, that sheet list is already placed here on this cover sheet. So if I zoom in here, you're going to see that we've got a nice list here of all the sheets that are contained on our sheets branch down here. So you could see each of the sheets that is in the set is listed there in that list. So if I scroll up to the schedules branch here and expand it, this is a sheet index schedule. So all a sheet index is just a schedule that is listing the sheets that are in your project instead of model geometry. Now, if you needed to create one of these from scratch, you could right click and it's got its own command here, new sheet list. But since it already exists in the project, there's no need for us to do that. But I just wanted to show you how you can do that in projects that don't already contain one. And then in the dialog that appears, it'll be just like creating any other schedule. You're just going to add the fields that you want to add. So for example, let's say that we wanted to customize this one. Okay, so rather than building a new one from scratch, we'll just customize the one that's here. Maybe I want to add the sheet issue date or who drew the sheet to this index. Well, I first need to get to that view. So I could double click it here on the project browser, or you could just double click it right here on the sheet. Either way, that puts you in that schedule, and it's just like any other schedule now. And if you look over here on the properties palette, you can edit the fields right here. So let's say I want to add the sheet issue date, and then maybe I want to add who drew the sheet as well. And let's put the drawn by first and then the issue date last. And then it might look something like that. Okay. Now, if we click back to the cover sheet, you can see that this has already captured those adjustments, and you're seeing that information here. So like any other schedule, this is live data, and you could edit this. So I could use this as a way of editing who drew individual sheets. Okay. Now, one thing you're noticing here is it doesn't fit anymore. Notice that it's kind of hanging off the edge of my title block here. Okay, so we certainly have some room elsewhere. So one option would be to move this sheet index someplace else. But if we wanted to keep it where it is here, I could maybe slide it over a little like so, but I'd want to adjust some of those columns. So there's two ways to do that. You can do it directly in the schedule by dragging between two columns there. But you'll notice here when it's selected on the sheet that you also have these little triangles up here, and that allows you to do essentially the same thing. So maybe the sheet number doesn't need quite so much room, so I can make that narrower, but then it compresses the header in kind of a strange way. Well, just come back here and you don't have to put the full property name sheet number. You can actually edit that text and abbreviate it. So I'm just going to put NO period. Now that makes that a little bit easier to read. Likewise, sheet issue date doesn't need to be written out entirely. I could just remove the word sheet and it could just say issue date. And then when we click over here, that's going to fit maybe a little bit more comfortably. And then if you decide to drag that a little bit narrower like so, now we finally have the index fitting more comfortably in the available space. Now, if you don't like just dragging these columns, you can actually set those numerically. if you prefer. So you would do that by selecting the column in the schedule here and clicking the resize button, and then you can type it in numerically. So here in the Imperial file, if I wanted the sheet name to be exactly 3 inches wide, I could type that in. That's about 75 millimeters in metric, and that will give me a little bit more room to work with as well. Okay, so feel free to make any other graphical adjustments that you'd like to. It is a schedule like any other. Now, the next thing I want to point out is how the schedule is formatted. If you look at the Sheets branch, you can see that my Sheets branch starts with sheet A101, and then the cover is unfortunately at the bottom because the number of this cover sheet is G101. Okay. Now, when I look at the sheet index, it's a little strange because, well, I've got this group called General, and the cover is at the top of that. Then I have Civil, the site plan. Then I have Architectural and all the architecturals. But then I've got these 3 other views that are just kind of up at the top sort of randomly. So what's happening there? Well, it turns out that there are some hidden fields in this schedule that are sorting and grouping it differently than what we see on the project browser. Okay. The project browser is just doing it alphanumerically, and you don't have any control over that. But on the sheet index, you do. So I'm going to scroll back up and look at the schedules branch, and the sheet index is under schedules typical, but there's also a branch called schedule working, and there are 2 items in there. So I'm going to double click the working sheet list, and this one displays the hidden fields. And now you can start to understand why the 3 sheets that we've added in some of the earlier videos here are not in the correct location on the list. There is a parameter here in column C called sheet sort, and that's just a number, but that is what's determining how to sort this schedule, not the sheet number itself. And then the sheet group is what creates these headings here, general and architectural. So what we can do is edit this directly, and I can choose from the existing list here, and I'm going to choose architectural for each of those 3 sheets that were created in earlier videos. And then all of those are A sheets, so they should all use this same sheet sort of 070. You can just type it in, or you should be able to just pull it from the list as well because it's been used previously. And now when I go back to the cover, notice that it has resorted everything correctly. Okay. So the working sheet list is just used for ensuring that your sheet index is in the correct order by assigning these additional hidden properties correctly to each of the sheets. So just try and remember that that's something that you'll want to do when working on your sheet list. Now, in addition to that, there is a working view list. And I just wanted to point this out briefly. I'm not going to really get into this in any kind of detail, but a view list is yet another kind of schedule. So right click and view list. And this is a schedule of all of the views in the project. And what could be useful about this is it allows you a kind of one-stop place where you can go in and check the settings of different views and then even make changes to them if they need to be changed. It includes things like the scope box that's assigned, the view template that's assigned. So if we realize that something should have a different view template, we can choose it here. If we realize something should have a different scope box, we can change it here. If you want to change the name of a sheet, you can change it here. So there's a lot of different settings that you can manipulate right here, and that can usually be a little bit quicker to work in that schedule than it would be to do it here on the project browser. So it just offers you another opportunity to do that. The 2 kind of go hand in hand because your views are placed on your sheets and then your sheets appear on the sheet index. So you might want to consult both of those working views and get everything in order there. And then when you do, you should have a sheet index that is correctly formatted in the right order and represents all of the sheets in your document set.
In this video, I'd like to talk to you about sheet collections. Sheet collections is a feature that allows you to set up multiple groups of sheets that behave independently. So typically, you're only able to use a sheet number once, and once you've used that sheet number, you can't repeat it. Revit wouldn't allow for that. But if you set up more than one sheet collection, you can. So within each sheet collection, you can repeat a numbering scheme over again. You still can't have duplicate numbers within the collection, but in the other collections, you can have duplicate numbers. So to demonstrate this feature, I'm going to work in the Snowden Towers sample architectural model that comes with the software. We last looked at this way back in chapter 1. So to remind you how to get there, I'm here on the home screen and I'm going to click the back button or Control D and then go to the file menu and hover over open. Don't click it. That will expand the open menu here. Then I'm going to come down to the bottom and choose sample files. And in this folder that appears, I will choose Snowden Towers Sample Architectural and click Open. Now, if you're a Revit LT user, you won't be able to open this directly using this method. You will have to first go out to the Autodesk website, download a copy of the Snowden Towers sample project, save it somewhere in your local hard drive, and open it from there. Okay, Revit LT does not include this sample model. Now, when the file opens, it will most likely open read-only. It's perfectly fine. Just click Continue Opening the file right here, and then we can begin. So what I want to do is come over here to the project browser, scroll down, and locate the Sheets branch right there. So to create a new sheet collection is as simple as right-clicking and choosing New Sheet Collection, and then you can right-click and rename it and give it a name. So in this example, I'm going to create a separate collection for schematic design and construction documents. Now, another way that you can change the name is right here. And of course, you can use that to fix typos as well. All right, so I now have my 2 sheet collections. Now we're going to add some sheets to them. And the simplest way to do that is to simply grab a sheet and drag and drop it into the desired collection. Now, you can do that with a multiple selection as well. So I could select sheet A101, scroll down, and I'm going to scroll all the way down to the cover sheet, hold my shift key down, click. That will select all the sheets in between. And you look up here on the properties palette, you can see that's a total of 38 sheets. Scroll back up, and I'll drag that entire collection into the construction documents sheet collection. All right, so now you can collapse these to get them out of the way temporarily. So let me just collapse the construction documents group there, and that leaves me with my schematic design. I'll scroll down now and locate my SD sheets. You can see they're currently named with SD prefixes. We're going to change that shortly, but for the time being, I'm going to select all of them. There are 7. And as an alternative to move them to the desired sheet collection, you can also do that up here on the properties palette. So it doesn't matter which way you do it. Both achieve the same thing. And now you'll notice that all of my SD sheets are in the schematic design sheet collection. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is sheet indices. So we've got a cover sheet open here. And if we zoom in over here on the right, you can see that sheet index over here on the cover sheet. And if you look at it carefully, you'll notice that it does not contain any of the SD sheets. Now, to achieve that, it's leveraging a feature called Include on Sheet Index. So I've still got the 7 schematic design sheets selected. I'm going to scroll down here on Properties. And notice that there's this Appears in Sheet List property here. It's currently unchecked. So regardless of whether you have these in sheet collections or not, if you have this box unchecked, these sheets will not appear on a sheet index at all. So what I want to do is turn that back on so that these sheets can appear on a sheet index. Now that will add them to this sheet index, which is not really what I want. Notice that the sheet index is now running off the page there and the schematic design sheets are at the top. But we'll fix that in just a moment. Okay, so that's just the first step. So now the SD sheets can be included on any sheet index. So now we're going to address the sheet index issue. So let's come up here to the schedules and quantities branch. There are 2 sub branches. Let's start with the working schedule. Scroll down and there's a working view, WView sheet list right here. Let's double click and open that up. So one of the things about sheet collections is that field is also available to your schedules. So if we scroll down here and locate the Edit Fields button, click it, scroll down in here, there's sheet collection, and I can add that to the schedule, click OK, and I now have this column over here on the right, which contains the sheet collection. And you could actually use this to edit that value. So that's another way that you could assign sheets to a sheet collection if you wish. All right, so this working sheet list, we could do any of the normal things with it. We could use it to group sheets, sort sheets, rename them, adjust them. That's all I wanted to show you in the working sheet list, is that we can add that field to the list. So let's close this one. And instead, let's open up the one that's here on the cover sheet. Now you could do that by double clicking it right here on the cover sheet. That will open it up, but it's also located here under typical schedules and right there, sheet index. So open it either way. So if you like, you can zoom in on it by holding the control key down and rolling the wheel. And what we want to do here is add that sheet collection to this index now. And we're going to use this as the filtering mechanism instead of that checkbox that we disabled a few moments ago. So how do we do that? Well, let's first add the field. So we're going to go to Edit Fields. And what I want to point out here is that there are only 2 fields visible, but there are actually 4 fields currently in the schedule. Okay. So 2 of these are being hidden: sheet sort and sheet group. So we're going to set up our sheet collection the same way. So I'm going to add that to the schedule, make sure it's at the bottom. And if I were to click OK right here, you'll see it appear as column C. I don't want column C to show up, the sheet collection to show up on my cover sheet. So I want it to be hidden like the other ones are. So if we go to formatting, we can select sheet collection and make it a hidden field. And that's how sheet group and sheet sort was set up as well. So when I click OK, now it hides that field, but it's still there. And the reason that we want it to be there is because what we want to do now is go to the filter tab, click edit, and now we're able to filter on sheet collection. Okay. So I'm going to go to sheet collection here equals schematic design and click OK. So notice that that shortens my sheet index to only include the schematic design sheets now. Trouble is, this is my construction documents cover sheet. It's not my schematic design cover sheet. So what I'm going to do here is right click and duplicate the sheet index. I will right click the copy and rename it. And I'm going to remove copy 1 and add SD to the end of the name. Then I'm going to leave this one just the way it is. We're already filtering out to just schematic design. But I'm going to go back to the original one here and go to filter. And instead of saying it equals schematic design, I will just simply say it does not equal schematic design. So by saying does not equal schematic design, it can equal anything else: none, construction documents, whatever is set there. And then finally, my cover sheet now is back to normal. Okay. So that takes care of that. But really, let's talk about the final thing, which is the main reason why we were doing sheet collections in the first place. If you try to reuse the same sheet number more than once within your project, it generates an error. So for example, if I said SD 101 for this second floor plan, it will generate this warning saying, this is already in use. Okay. So you're not allowed to do that. Now back here, I already have sheets A100, A101, A102, but that's in a different sheet collection. That means that I'm able, with no error here, change the numbers of all of these SD sheets to A series, assuming that that's what I wanted to do. And that really is the main reason and the main benefit to using sheet collection. So if you find yourself in a situation like that, where you'd like to have 2 groups of sheets that use the same numbering scheme for whatever purpose, then sheet collections is the tool that you want to explore.
As you're working on your Revit project, it is possible that you might need to share your work with recipients who are not using Revit. Now, a common scenario might be that somebody on the project team needs AutoCAD files generated from your Revit model. So what I'd like to do in this video is walk through the process of exporting the views in your Revit model to the AutoCAD format. The process would be similar if you want to choose a different format. So Revit does actually support export to other formats as well. So let's go to the File menu here, and we're going to come down to this Export item. And if you hover over that, it will display a sub-menu, and this is where you can see the other formats that are supported. So we're going to be doing CAD formats and DWG for AutoCAD, but there is DXF and DGN. You can export PDFs, IFC files. So there's a number of choices available on this menu, but let's stick with DWG for this example, and that will display this window next. Now, there's an awful lot that we can configure in this window, so I'm going to kind of give you a high-level overview of it. But the first thing that you want to consider is what you're exporting. So right over here, there's an export dropdown, and it's defaulting to the current view or sheet only, and we're getting a preview of that here. So that would just be the cover sheet. If you click that, it's a menu, and you could choose all sheets, or you could choose this in session option, which would allow you to make a selection of sheets. Now, when you do that, the selection is just including the cover sheet. So you might be thinking, well, what's going on there? Well, that's simply because this second menu that appears says all views and sheets in the set. So the set is just simply those that are selected. So if I expand that, there are some other choices. And I can do this bottom choice here that says all views and sheets in the model. And now I get a comprehensive list. Okay. So that's the first hurdle to overcome, is getting to the list, right? Now we're going to do check none because I want to clear any selections. I don't actually want to export the cover sheet, but I'm going to export just a small selection of views instead. Let's do this 3D stair view right here. I think that'll be interesting. Let's scroll down and locate a floor plan sheet. So I'm going to take not the actual view, I want to find the sheet. So I'm going to keep scrolling until I see the sheets here. And there's sheet A101, architectural floor plans. I'll choose that. And let's do one more. Let's also do maybe some elevations. So it doesn't matter if I do 202 or 203, just pick one. And we'll just start with those three selections. Now, before I click next, let's consider the export setup. Now, it's possible you might have a list of choices here. I just have the one. To edit that setup, I click this browse button here, and that takes me to another very extensive dialog where you'll see lots of choices. Now, we're not going to go through everything in here because that would take quite a bit of time, but layers is somewhat important to your AutoCAD recipient, so let's spend a few moments talking about that. Now, everything's kind of compressed here, so what I'm going to do is stretch out a couple of these columns just so you can read things a little bit better. And let's consider just one of the entries on this list. So here there's an entry, casework. That is the Revit category called casework. What this is saying is when this exports to AutoCAD, it will convert elements that are on the casework category in Revit to the Q-case layer in AutoCAD and use color 31 to represent those elements. Now, I said convert because this is a destructive process. AutoCAD does not read Revit files. It can't just simply open a Revit file. It doesn't understand Revit geometry. So we need to take elements that are casework and essentially trace over them or convert them to just simple geometry like lines and planes and circles and things like that. So that's what I mean by convert. And it will draw those elements on the layer indicated here. Now, where did this list of layers come from? And it is a very long list, by the way, if you scroll through here. Okay. That came from the American Institute of Architects standard. That's what I'm using up here at the top. But notice there are some other international standards if you prefer. So that is up to you if you want to choose something else there. Now, you could edit all the entries in here. You could type in your own layer names, your own colors. If you need to do that, then it will take some time. So make sure you set aside an appropriate amount of time to work on that. But I'm simply going to accept all of the defaults here using the AIA standard. Now, I could do similar things on the Lines tab, the Patterns tab, the Text tabs. And notice that in all these cases, it's generally defaulting to automatically generate the hatch pattern. So it's going to do kind of a direct mapping and create these things on the AutoCAD side. But you could do a hard mapping if you wish by choosing it from the menu. So again, lots of settings to consider, lots of things you could potentially configure. I'm going to accept all the defaults. I'm not going to change anything on colors. Now, I am exporting a 3D view in my selection. Remember, I chose the stair view. So here you get to decide what kind of 3D geometry should be created. It can either be a poly mesh or an ACES solid. I prefer solids, so that's what I'm going to choose. Units and coordinates. Make sure you understand what unit system your recipient wants to receive and choose appropriately. Now, if you're working in Imperial, AutoCAD typically defaults to inch, so that's what's chosen here. But if you're working in metric, you can choose millimeter or centimeter, whatever is appropriate. I do think in most cases, you'll want to change the coordinate base here to shared coordinates. This will make it easier for your recipient to XREF your files and have them line up properly, but you might want to have a conversation with them just to be sure. Okay, but at this point, I've made 2 changes in this dialog. I have changed it to ACES solids and shared coordinates. I left everything else at the default. The final thing I want to point out to you is here on the General tab. Make sure you have a conversation with your recipient and know which version of AutoCAD they're using. The latest version of AutoCAD is what I'm going to select here, but if for some reason your recipient is using an older version of AutoCAD, then it's important to know that before you export the file. Now, there's also this option here to export views on sheets and link them as external references. I think that is really powerful, and your AutoCAD recipient will appreciate that. So I usually leave that checked on. So let's click OK. I'm going to click Next here, and now it will want to know where I want to export these files to. I'm just going to put them on my desktop, and then I'm going to go ahead and click OK here and accept the remaining defaults. Now, it might take a moment or two while it does the exporting. Now, when it's done, you will have a collection of AutoCAD files on your desktop or wherever you decided to place them in. I happen to have AutoCAD running here in the background. And what I'm going to do now is open up a couple of the resulting files and show you what they look like. So I'm going to use the open icon here, go to my desktop, and let's make this a little bit wider so that I can see the names here. And notice that several files were actually created. So we chose 3 items on the Revit side, but we got nearly 10 files here. So the 3D views are here, and then the sheet views are here. Now I want to focus on the sheet views in particular. This one right here, the A101, notice that that includes the title block and the views and so forth. So if I open this file, usually it comes in zoomed in really close. So in AutoCAD, to zoom to the extent of the file, you type the letter Z, enter it, and then you type the letter E, enter it, and that will do a zoom extents, which is the same as zoom to fit in Revit. So notice that it exported the title block, it exported viewports, and inside each viewport, it created the views that we placed on those sheets, okay? And in this case, you could see that I've got the floor plan, I've got my schedule, I've got a door legend. Okay, so everything got exported here. Now, it might be easier to understand what we're looking at here if we open the floor plan directly. So if I go to open, that floor plan in the viewport is its own separate DWG right here, and I can open that up directly. And notice that now I can zoom in and see all of the geometry that was created. Now, it doesn't create walls. AutoCAD doesn't have walls. Instead, what I get is 2 separate lines here. Notice that the color of the lines and the interior are different than the color of the lines on the exterior. So it used different layers for the interior walls and the exterior walls. Remember that casework layer that we talked about? Well, here is a casework element, this countertop. And when I select that and right click and choose quick properties, you're going to see that it is on a layer called Q-case. So that it's the layer that Dialog told us it was going to be exported to. Now, some objects will get exported more as objects. AutoCAD calls those blocks. So typically that's going to be things like doors are going to be exported that way. But notice that this electrical symbol is actually just line work. It's just arcs and lines. So not every element will get exported as a block. So the goal is for it to be visually correct, but keep in mind that it's just geometry at this point. These are not elements in the sense of what they were in Revit. Now, the other thing that's really important to understand is this is a flat 2D drawing now. None of this is 3D geometry. Now, it is possible to export 3D geometry, and that's why I chose the 3D stair. So you have to explicitly choose a 3D view to export to get 3D geometry on the AutoCAD side, and then you can see that this is something that I can orbit. It is 3D geometry. If I select these, however, it's going to be things like body or a 3D solid. It's not going to come in as columns or floors. The AutoCAD recipient, if they need 3D geometry, you can send them something, but again, it's not a substitute for Revit. This gives you some idea of what is exportable from Revit. We're doing AutoCAD here, but other file formats are supported, so feel free to experiment with those if you wish. And one last point, just keep in mind that because we are doing an export here, it's not a live link. So if you need to make changes, you will need to re-export all of the geometry and send it to your recipient, and it will replace whatever they have on their end. So there's no way to keep these connected together with a link. It's going to be a separate export each time. In this video, I'm going to generate some output from my model. Now, I'm going to do it as a PDF, but it's also possible to print directly to your hard copy print device if you wish. You're going to find both options on the File menu. Under Print, you've got your print command here, print preview, print setup. So if you want to print directly to your printer, you can choose those options. If you want to generate a PDF first, which I think is a little more common these days, then that option is right here. It's also available under Export right here. And finally, it has a shortcut up here on the Quick Access toolbar. So any one of those would get you to the same place, this dialog right here. So let's go through some of these more common settings that are available here in this dialog. Current window at the top would just print what you see on screen. Okay, so that would just be this cover sheet in this case, which probably wouldn't be super useful to print by itself. Visible portion of the current window, I need to close this to kind of illustrate. I'm going to actually switch views here. I'm going to open up the L1 architectural plan, and I'm going to zoom in nice and close here on these items. And if we go back to export, visible portion of the current window would just do what you see on screen now. Okay, so instead of printing the entire view, it would just focus in on this area. So if there's some little portion of the view that you want to talk about and you want to just basically do a screen capture is what that amounts to. I think most of the time, selected views and sheets is going to be your likely option though, because this is going to allow you to either print all the sheets that are in the file or use this icon here to edit the list and choose a selection of sheets. So you can see that there's a selection of sheets already chosen here, but we can customize this should we need to. There's a display filter here, and you can actually include views as well as sheets, 2D and 3D. So it doesn't have to just be sheets. But in order to see the other options, I need to uncheck this hide unchecked views and sheets item here. And now you'll see these are all the ones that were checked, but notice that there are several other options available. So if I wanted to print this roof plan view along with the set, I could include it. It won't have a title block, but it will just print the roof plan as it stands. Okay. Now, if I scroll down a little further, there are some additional sheets in the list that weren't included in the original selection. So another way that you could deal with this list is to say, I'm only interested in sheets, but I want to see all of them without the other views in the way. So we're going to uncheck 2D views and 3D views. And now this only shows me the sheets. And then you could come in here and check any of the additional sheets that you wanted to include in this set. Now, once you've done that, you may notice that the order is not correct. Okay. So what I would like to do is take these newly added sheets 103 through 107 and move those up to after 102. So there's an edit print order button here. And then in this window, you can actually select with your shift key multiple sheets. So I'm going to select that whole collection there, drag it and drop it right there. And now I've reorganized the sheet list in my desired order. So now I'm going to click OK. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to select that, and you can actually save it too. So if you click save, then this will become a new selection. And what it just did was it overwrote the previously saved version called all sheets. Okay, so now I've just kind of overridden that. If you want to duplicate it first, there is a save as up here. All right, so I'm going to click select. So now my selection is the list called all sheets. Okay, next, what do you want to call the file? I'll accept the default. Do you want to combine all the sheets together into a single PDF? Now that's my preference, but if you want a separate PDF for each sheet, you can uncheck that. Where do you want to save it? I'm going to put it on my desktop. Okay, so I'll choose that. You can choose a page size, but I think most of the time you're just going to want to accept the use sheet size. So each sheet will tell the PDF how big it is, and it will use the correct size. I do think, however, you want to change the zoom to 100%. That's full size, right? Now, it is possible to change this. So if you want a half size set, you could do 50%, okay? But I want to do full size 100%. I'm going to center it. I'm going to accept all of these options here for high quality and vector processing. Some of your views will need to do raster processing, even though you choose vector processing. That's perfectly fine. Next, I want to talk about these settings down here at the bottom of the screen. Okay, some of these are kind of interesting. Since we're generating a PDF and it's in color, if you want, the view links can also be in color. So one example is this section head right here. So that means that that section head will be in color in the PDF print. If you uncheck that, it'll be black. Hide reference planes and work planes. We've got some examples here on screen. This dashed vertical line that runs through the elevation symbol, that is a reference plane. So if you have that checked, it will hide that element. Hide scope boxes. This dashed horizontal line on screen is a scope box. So if you have that checked, it will hide the scope box. I think that's a pretty good idea. Whether or not you have crop boundaries hidden in the views, you can hide them at the time of print. So I think that's also a pretty good idea. And then one of my favorite settings is this one right here. An unreferenced view tag is like this section mark right here. So it is unreferenced because it doesn't have a sheet number indication. The elevation symbol beneath it does. So the elevation is detail 1 on A202. That's a referenced view tag. It will print regardless, but the section marker that doesn't have a sheet reference, it'll actually hide that. So the idea is, if you're generating a set of documents, do you want to include section indicators for sections that don't appear anywhere in the set? Okay, that might confuse people. So that's a nice feature. Those are the settings that I want to do. Now all that remains for me to do is click export. It's asking if I want to reuse these settings in the future and save it and give it a name. I can answer yes here, and I'll just change the 1 at the end and call this default and click OK. So that setup is now reusable. I can use that again the next time I export the PDF, and now we just have to wait for it to process the file. Now, you may recall that in the dialogue, I mentioned raster and vector processing, and I said that some of the views would need to use raster processing regardless of what we chose there. That's what this message is telling me here. So it's telling me that raster processing was used for any views that had shading or shadows. Okay, so that's perfectly fine. You can just ignore that warning. I saved my file on the desktop. So here's my desktop right here, and there is the file. So I'm going to open that up. Let's maximize it. And as you can see, we're looking at the cover sheet initially. Now over here on the left, I'm going to click the page view, and this will show me the page thumbnails. And now you can see all of the sheets from this project have been saved together in a single PDF file. I can click on one of these floor plans as an example here. And remember that we had that option turned on to hide unreferenced view tags. Well, notice that my section cuts do not appear here because those were not on sheets. However, if you look at the 4 sides, you'll see that I do have 4 elevation indicators. Notice if you move your mouse near one of these elevation indicators, you should get a little pointer icon. I can click on that and it will jump right to that sheet. Okay, so one of the advantages of doing a multi-sheet PDF is it tries to maintain the links between them so that you can jump back and forth between those views. It also works here with the level heads. So I can jump back to the floor plan by clicking on one of those level heads. Now, one thing I noticed when looking at this is that I'm seeing the room separator lines. So even though we had checkboxes to hide reference planes, to hide scope boxes, to hide crop regions, and unreferenced view tags, notice that things like room separation lines will be visible if they were showing on screen. So there is no setting that says hide room separation lines. So the only way you could hide these orange lines is to go back to Revit, hide that category, and regenerate the PDF. So if you want to try that or any other adjustments, feel free to do so, but you will need to generate the PDF over again if you make any changes to the Revit model.
Well, let me be the first to congratulate you on successfully completing this course. We've covered a lot of material here, and I hope you found it valuable. Now, there's plenty more to learn and to do, but in order to keep your skills moving forward and improving, I encourage you to jump right into Revit and begin creating your own projects. If you don't have a project that you're working on right now, then just go home and measure up your house or your apartment and try drawing that in Revit. It's a great way to practice and to hone your skills. And if you're looking for other courses to take as a follow-up to this one, then allow me to recommend some of the other courses that I have here in the library. You can start with my weekly series, Revit Tips, Tricks, and Troubleshooting. In it, I cover a new Revit skill each week, and if you like, you can binge watch a few years worth of back episodes. I also have several courses that focus on specific topics like detailing, phasing and design options, the conceptual massing environment, rendering, and the Revit family editor, just to name a few. Whichever one you choose, I wish you the best of luck, and I'd like to thank you for spending time with me learning the essentials of Revit.